Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. And we have a Game of Thrones. Is it the Pope going against the small hats? Well, they have fought over the so-called Holy Land several times. Pay attention to that. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, let's see. What is this warning? What is the Pope talking about? Why is he warning Trump? What is he warning him about? Do he want more mass migrations into America? What is he trying to do to America? Well, let's find out. What is his warnings about?
This is Dabu 7. We've got Jesuit Pope Francis dropping a warning to Trump and basically saying that the direction he's taking things, it's going to all end badly here on this world stage. Now, he makes these statements, and if you don't know, the Pope is back.
This is not just about no migrants in America. You got to pay attention to what's been going on in Palestine and who has been fighting each other for that land historically in Palestine. What role did the Catholic Church play? Do the small hats and the Catholic Church get along? Hell no. Is Trump making moves on behalf of the small hats? And the Pope is seeing this, and now he's making his move and warning him. Absolutely.
The flooding of migrants into everywhere, not only the United States, but all across Europe. He's on record telling everyone to take these people into their homes when they rejected them and would not let the same people into the Vatican. So Tom Homan, the border czar, heard some of these comments. He was like, oh, it's going to all end badly. Well, he fired back and he said that the Vatican has a wall around it, does it not? And that how can he be hypocritical and make those statements when our border should be secure and that he should stick to doing his thing and let them do theirs? And it's true that they do make these calls for things just like this, for people to take migrants into their home all across Europe. And you see what that has led to. You see exactly what that's led to. The one country that, interestingly enough, has made a huge stand against this as of late has been Italy. Yeah, where they have gone the other route. So he makes these statements, but he doesn't back it up himself, and he is in full support of the flooding of migrants into all these areas where chaos is ensuing. So join me for the live stream where I talk about this in greater detail, going live Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern, right here.
Backlash from religious leaders across the globe over its immigration policies. Pope Francis, in an open letter to America's Catholic bishops, saying, quote, I exhort all the faithful of the Catholic Church not to give in to narratives that discriminate against and cause unnecessary suffering to our migrant and refugee brothers and sisters. Meantime, a federal lawsuit is calling out the administration for allowing ICE agents to make arrests in houses of worship. News Nation's Alex Capriello joins us live to break all of this down. So, Alex, how are Trump administration officials now responding to this criticism?
Well, we heard from the border czar, who is a lifelong Catholic. He had harsh words for the Holy Father on the front steps of the White House, telling him to practice what he preaches and then take a deeper look inside his own house of worship before casting stones. Take a listen.
He ought to fix the Catholic Church and concentrate on his work and leave border enforcement to us. He wants to attack us from securing our border. He's got a wall around the Vatican, does he not? So he's got a wall around to protect his people and himself, but we can't have a wall around the United States. So I wish he'd stick to the Catholic Church and fix that.
The Catholic Church is into a lot of rituals, a lot of deceptive, deep, dark, demonic rituals, and they need a lot of bodies. We know a lot of human trafficking, child trafficking is going on. The Pope is calling for more of that, particularly. That's what he wants.
and leave border enforcement to us.
In a letter to U.S. bishops, the Pope issued a major rebuke of the current immigration crackdown happening in the U.S. In the 10-point letter, Pope Francis condemned the mass deportation of illegal immigrants in America, saying,
But if Putin can't do this, or they were trying to sanction Russia. Should we sanction the Vatican for getting in America's business and threatening the president?
Damaging to the human dignity of those who have left their own country due to poverty, persecution, and exploitation. The Pope also drawing parallels to other biblical stories of migration, like the Exodus from Egypt and Jesus Christ's own experience of being expelled from his own land. He advises the bishops to lead by example and continue their work with migrants and refugees.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News
See
Nation.
how the Pope try to use stories that have nothing to do with him or his people to justify his nonsense. Well, he threatened the president, so we're going to keep our eye on him, telling Trump things can go real badly for him.
ICE requesting a lot more money to secure the border, and trying to pull out strings with the IRS, using IRS agents. They're demanding now is multiple billions of dollars to secure the southern border. Again, Colonel Douglas McGregor has been open about this idea. It needs to be a military operation. So maybe now that awareness is dawning on Washington, D.C. So we're going to get to all of that and more today on your Wednesday. Good to see all of you guys here. Hey, we should tell you we have a daily newsletter. We had hundreds of you sign up for it yesterday. It's totally free. Just go to redacted.inc and you can sign up. It's delivered to your inbox first thing in the morning, and Natalie works hard on writing it and delivered to your inbox. You can read it over your cup of coffee first thing in the morning, covering about 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day that the mainstream media largely ignores. So again, go to redacted.inc and sign up for the free Redacted newsletter right now.
Do that.
All right, let's talk about this. Well, the ceasefire in Gaza is getting closer to collapse. Why is that happening? Well, Israel's own media now confirming that Israel, yes, Israel, has violated the terms of the ceasefire, not Hamas. Even the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, confirmed to Israeli media that they have violated the terms of the ceasefire. Again, this is not like propaganda. They are telling us that this has happened. So why the hell is Benjamin Netanyahu then suddenly releasing a video message making demands that were not a part of the original ceasefire agreement, moving the goalpost? Watch.
סיימתי כעת דיון מעמיק של 4 שעות בקבינט המדיני-ביטחוני. כולנו הבנו תרעומת מהמצב המזעזע של 3 חטופינו ששוחררו בשבת האחרונה. כולנו גם בירכנו על הדרישה של הנשיא טראמפ לשחרור חטופינו עד שבת בצהריים, וכולנו גם בירכנו על החזון המהפכני של הנשיא לעתיד עזה.
So in many ways, leaning on President Trump's comments the other day that all hostages better be released by this weekend or all hell was going to break loose. And so Netanyahu sort of jumping on that. It all doesn't really make sense at all unless this has all been planned for many, many months. And we're just along for all of the theater right now. Let's bring in Colonel Douglas McGregor, one of the sharpest inside minds on all of this, to talk about this. Colonel, good to see you. What do you make of this sort of moving of the goalpost here? Is this all theater?
No, and it's not unusual for the Israelis if you go back through history. They frequently violate ceasefires when they think it's in their interest to do so, and they make no apologies for it. So I don't think anybody's surprised. Having said that, there was never any expectation among serious people that this ceasefire, as weak as it was, because they're still in Lebanon, South Lebanon, they're violating this thing all over the place, would ever last beyond the first phase. The assumption was that this was a pause. It was in the interests of the Israeli Defense Force, particularly the ground troops, that the Hamas organization and the Palestinians would go along, obviously, because they need aid trucks. But out of the 8,000 plus trucks, only about 4,000, or I think it's at 4,000 or 5,000, have actually gotten into Gaza. So that hasn't worked all that well. So I think this was predictable. And now that President Trump has made his strident threat, I simply think that they're going to make virtue of necessity, because their plan was always to return to the war of destruction in Gaza.
Absolutely.
And I think what we're going to witness, sadly, is a return to just that, bombing, heavy bombing.
Remember,
and the move.
the threats that the Pope made about this going to end badly for Trump is not just about what's happening in America. It is basically about Palestine, because historically the Catholic Church wanted to claim this as their holy place, to keep their story going for themselves and to go against the small hats. This is what I'm saying, Game of Thrones. So a lot of this Gaza situation, the Pope is reacting because Trump is siding so viciously for the small hats. That's a fact.
Movement of some ground forces carefully, cautiously into areas that have been severely bombed. And I don't know what happens to the population that's now gone north to try and reclaim lost territory. They're very much at risk. And remember, we just delivered enormous quantities of 2,000-pound bombs. And in addition to that, this mother of all bombs, which delivers the equivalent of a 10-kiloton warhead. I mean, anything's possible, and I fear the worst.
Well, I have a question. Now, President Trump has stuck his neck out to be an ally for Israel and said, with Netanyahu sitting right next to him, Gaza's a hell because they bomb the hell out of them, while Netanyahu sat right there. But he still, like I said, stuck his neck out to defend Israel. Shouldn't this violation of the ceasefire be an embarrassment to President Trump? Do you think that there's any other way to see it? And will Trump see it this way?
I'm not sure how President Trump sees it. I fear
ceasefire was a scam so they can get some of those hostages back and then go back to killing the Palestinians. This was a scam. Trump should feel scammed, but he not.
That his view is that it doesn't matter. He's committed unconditionally to Israel. This is something that became very, very clear early on. Go back to the Republican convention. And remember this speech that was given with this giant Israeli flag behind that said Israel first. And I think it's very clear that if you were going to serve in this administration, you had to sign on for the Israel first agenda. And that's what he's implementing. Now, the bad news here, Natalie, is that we poisoned the well in the Middle East. Virtually nobody trusts us. Everybody thinks that we're the enemy. They all know that without us, without our willingness to underwrite the Israelis and provide the equipment and bombs to them, nothing would happen. And we are still the reason, I think, that everyone has exercised restraint. I include the Iranians, and I think that also applies to some extent to the Turks, because what's going on right now is almost a universal coalescing of Islamic states against Israel and the United States.
You know, talk about these allies and how spoiled has become. The King of Jordan visited Trump yesterday and sat there next to him. And it seemed like the Trump administration was sort of speaking on behalf of the Jordanians. And then they came out today and had to sort of clarify the position.
Hold on. What happened was the Jordanian king absolutely was humiliated in front of Trump. But he knew. See, that man was a wise man. Had he defied Trump in Trump's face and embarrassed the American president on national TV, he would have been overthrown before he can even get home. The U.S. would have put his cousin in power, and he would have been a dead man. That's a fact. So he laughed it off, brushed it off, and said that, well, we got to talk to Egypt and see what Egypt and the Arabs got to say about what to do to the Palestinians. He knew damn well what Egypt was and the Arabs was going to say. Egypt done put his military onto the battlefield. The Egyptian president not finna lose his head back in Trump. That's not gonna happen. And he refused to go sit in front of Trump, so I don't have to disrespect you to your face. I'm gonna stand my country and tell you, oh hell no, we're not finna remove the Palestinians. So the Jordanians people, the prime minister, as soon as his king finished talking, he came on TV and denounced that they would not be moving the Palestinians. So it was so Trump is the only one. He ain't have no Middle East allies backing anything that he's saying.
Go along with the removal of all Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. But Jordan seemed to come out and
So our brother Lunch Break Chronicles for the donation to the war chest. He said, revolutionary salute to you, brother. I appreciate the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Salute.
Walk that back and say that's not what we want at all. What do you make of the Jordanian position right now?
Well, the Jordanian government said that if large numbers of Palestinians were forced out of Israel and into Jordan, that Jordan would declare war against Israel. So I think that's the story.
They don't have
what the Jordanians agreed to do is to take some 2,000 severely injured or ill children into Jordan to put into hospitals and so forth from Gaza. And of course, remember that you have General Sisi, who also met with President Trump, and he made it very clear that it's an impossibility. He's got a large part of the Egyptian army mobilized and now sitting on the border with Gaza and Israel. So I think the region is poised for a regional war. It'll begin somewhere in that vicinity.
The news not showing it. Egypt got so much military equipment that they didn't put. I think I got the video. They didn't put so much military. They're not talking. Fuck talking on TV. Them people they're ready for war. Forget going on TV and just saying anything. The Egyptian president El-Sisi, the general, done said he just gonna have to go to war before he allowed them people to kick all the Palestinians. Because remember, it also boiled down to the Palestinians are ruled by Hamas, which has had some ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. That's not how the Egyptians want to be ruled, by the Muslim Brotherhood. Neither do the Saudis, neither do the Kuwaitis, neither do the Emiratis. No, they rule differently. They don't like political Islam. This also got to do with political Islam. So it's dangerous games being played, and the Arab leaders will not allow political Islam to come within their borders. Removing the Palestinians will get their heads chopped off. Political Islam be right up under them. They're not going for that.
And it'll spread rapidly.
So do you think, final question on Israel, is this ceasefire finished? Are we about to see a lot more bloodshed?
Yes. And I think this will trigger the regional war. You're talking, you heard President Trump, he accurately described Gaza. He said it looks like a demolition site. Now, in the meantime, we provide all these munitions, and the Israelis say they're going to return to the destruction of Gaza. They're going to wage that war. In fact, President Trump also said that he would back the annexation of the West Bank to Israel. That means more mass murder and expulsion for the Palestinians that live on the West Bank. Where else can this be headed but to a regional war? Because at some point, and I think it's close, everyone in the region is going to say, that's it, no further. And they're all going to coalesce. And that's why I worry about not just Iran, but also Turkey. The Turks now share a border with Israel. Let's be frank. Erdogan calls the tune in Syria.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's running the show in Syria.
Right. Well, let's pivot to talk about Ukraine, something that you, I want to say, have been right about all along. Now, President Trump says that he has spoken with Russian President Putin, and they are discussing a resolution to the war. He does not say he's going to check with Zelensky in this post. He says he will tell Zelensky. Just today, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says that a peace deal will not involve Russia giving back the territory of the people who voted to join Russia. I want to play this clip and then get your reaction, if you will.
We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine.
No, you don't.
But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops.
All right. So now that we have demasculized Zelensky, what do you think happens next?
I think President Trump is increasingly aware that Zelensky is simply a crook and a criminal. I think probably, Musk and others have probably told him about the billions of dollars stolen that have now shown up in bank accounts outside of Ukraine. And I think President Trump said, look, we're not going to reverse the gains of the Russians. The borders are going to have to change. Well, that's one good step in the right direction. However, the rest of these comments that were made have no chance of happening. The Russians want Ukraine to be neutral, but they're not interested in foreign forces on Ukrainian soil.
Not going.
And I don't think they're going to acquiesce in that. I'd be very surprised if they did. There's still this lingering notion of some sort of separation that's going to be policed by troops. I don't think the Russians are going to be very interested in that either. So, and then finally, and this is very important, I'm glad President Trump is going to talk directly to Putin. Thus far, until now, he hasn't. He talked through an intermediary. So now we have direct communication, and he's going to go to Moscow, I think. Peskov seemed to indicate as much. If he does that, that's a good thing, but he's got to go in there understanding certain things. The Russians are going to continue to fight and advance as long as there is any life left in the Ukrainian army. In other words, they're not stopping. You can negotiate all you want, but they're going to continue to move forward. And that's because the Russians have always said what they wanted. They want the aid to stop, and that has to stop. Our aid to the Ukrainians is what's keeping things moving, cash and weapons. That has to stop. And once it stops, the Europeans will bail out because they don't have the wherewithal to do any of this on their own. Everybody knows that.
Now,
so
they've been exposed. They've been exposed. I don't want to hear one word about those European nations no more. That's why Africa can rise up. We're going to take a look at that tomorrow, the war in the Congo, and how Europe is using Rwanda to now try to steal and colonize, and America's down with it. We're going to look at that. But Europe can no longer, I said this, it's no European nation that can go to Africa and defeat an African nation. Just they don't have it like that no more. Those days are over with. That's why they got to use terrorists. That's over with. Listen, without the U.S., the mighty Europe can't even continue the war in Ukraine. Can't even continue funding it. Can't even continue sending weapons to it. This is the definition of a paper tiger. Tough, all on paper. Just imagine that. Without the U.S., all y'all nations, 30, 40 European nations, you can't fight Russia? Hell no. Well, why the fuck? Trump said this a long time ago. Why are they talking tough to Russia and buying all that Russian gas if Russia y'all enemy? See, Trump put it in, he was right about that. If Russia y'all enemy, y'all should be buying the gas from us. He knew it was a scam. You want to buy all that gas from Russia, but then you want us to defend you. Okay, we're going to step back. You can't even defend yourself. It's over for Europe, like in the eyes of what they were. That's why they're getting bullied right now by Trump, because Trump know the truth. The rest of the world got to wake up to. The Europeans are pathetically finished. They don't never need to talk shit to China. Definitely don't never need to say one word to Kim Jong-un. Who the hell y'all think y'all talking to? Man, don't make Kim conquer Europe. You can't do nothing about it.
The thing is, we've got to get out of Ukraine. I'm talking about Americans who are on the ground there, not just the Europeans. All of us have got to get out. Now, the Russians are going to insist on that, I'm sure, privately. And hopefully, President Trump will respond to it because, and here is the important point, Natalie Clayton, we have no leverage over the Russians. None.
And so, yeah, we're going to dictate some sort of a peacekeeping force from NATO that's going to be on the ground there. They'll never go for it, as you've pointed out many, many times. And the government of Ukraine, of course, the CIA placed a Western-backed puppet government there in 2014. So Putin is not going to go along with like Zelensky light, right? There's going to have to be a Russian, maybe sympathetic government in Ukraine, no?
Of course, absolutely. I mean, there's no question about it. And the Austrian State Treaty, which I've mentioned many times before, is a good example. And that could be a good model for Ukraine. And the Russians, at least for the first 10 years after 1955, maintained a delegation in Vienna. And they had senior officials sit on the Austrian National Defense Council. And that was to ensure that there was no interest in revanchism. In other words, no interest in harming Russians or attacking Russia. So I think you'll have something similar in Ukraine. But we have to ask ourselves, and this is something that President Trump needs to decide, what do we want with Russia, not just from Russia? And I think the answer to that is peace and prosperity. We have no interest in destroying Russia. They have no interest in destroying us. Let's get out of that straitjacket. Let's dump it. Trump had no part in that. That's all Biden and his.
See, we as the American people have no interest in that. But the small hats hate Russia because they destroyed their little Khazarian kingdom. That's a fact. They hate them. They want to end Russia forever. But anyway, the big business people, the military industrial complex, they need Russia as the boogeyman to steal trillions of dollars from us. You know, they need to say China is our enemy so they can take all of our money. They have to say North Korea want to kill us, and ISIS and Al Qaeda want to cut our throats because they hate our freedom, so they can shake us down. They have to continue these lies that they all made up to steal our money.
Friends. So President Trump has a brilliant opportunity to make a clean sweep and start over fresh with Russia, and we need to. We should be cooperating, not fighting.
Well, you've been right. Many, many times, and people who've been paying attention to you for many, many years know that to be the case. I want to point out that you're launching a new show, so we would love to promote your new. So here is a little promo. You guys
now in the marketplace with you, Clayton.
That's right. I think you'll win probably.
Let's
clearly.
do it.
Here's a new promo. So let's roll this promo. Watch this.
If you keep advancing, we'll have to use a nuclear weapon. The use of any nuclear weapon is going to precipitate escalation very rapidly. Our people must be well informed with the truth for us to make educated decisions. It's time to take our nation back.
All right, that launches March 11th. So
congratulations. I don't see that as competing with us. We're always better off when the marketplace of ideas is robust. So welcome to the.
Yeah, but we got to find somebody like you, Natalie, to come on the show to keep everybody interested. You know, we don't have anybody like you yet.
All right, I'll clone myself.
Okay, well, that would be great. It's twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday for 1 hour in the afternoon, I suspect. And eventually, you know, these episodes, as they pile up, they will be available on all platforms, but initially only on Republic. And that's the social media platform, republic.us. You can find that easily. This is going to be a take no prisoners operation. We want the truth, and that's what we're going to look for. And we're going to try to provide it to Americans, and we're going to bring on a lot of Americans to talk to us. And I'm not just talking about celebrities, you know. We'll have some of those, but we want real people. And we want to find out what's really happening and talk about it.
Well, that's why we love having you on our show, because you don't pull any punches. And if someone doesn't like you because their worldview gets shaken up from time to time, that's a good thing, going after the truth. So, Colonel, we always love having you here on the show. Congratulations on the launch of the new show. We'll be watching it. And thanks so much for your insights, as always, Colonel. Thanks.
Hey, thank you both. Bye-bye.
All right, we got a lot more news to get to here on your Wednesday. We're going to look at ICE requiring more funding, and we're getting to the heart of some of
See us on tour in Dallas, Austin, Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, New York, Atlantic City, Levittown, Cohost, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for the link for the cheapest tickets. Guess what Tucker Carlson found out about the Ukraine military?
This ought to be good.
Yeah, they've been selling American weapon systems on the black market.
Of
course. I'm kidding?
Wait, we know this because we covered it when CBS had to take down their documentary, and they said 80% of the weapons weren't getting there.
Oh, remember that? Yeah.
And then they had to pull it.
And then they had to pull it.
Reported.
That's right. Here we go.
Second fact, not guess, fact is Ukrainian military is selling a huge percentage, up to half of the arms that we send them. Half. And I'm not guessing about this. I know that for a fact, okay? Not speculation. And they're selling it, and a lot of us winding up with the drug cartels on our border. So this is a crime. What's happening? Our intel agencies are fully aware of this. You tell me they're not profiting from this. Of course, you think the CIA is not profiting from this? Yes, they are. I can't prove that, but I believe that. What they don't know this, I know this, but they don't know this. They know this. And no one is saying it. Like, no American seems aware of this. We're sending these arms to Ukraine, billions of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, and it's being stolen and sold to our actual enemies. Like, what the? I'm trying not to swear. What is this?
Yeah, well, the reason why is because you have Zelensky, it was about 3 weeks ago, I think, was specifically asked this question. So he went at some length in one of his interviews to say, oh, no, absolutely not. There's no truth to that at all. We've implemented all this thing. I know that, but the media just reported what he said.
The New York Times could get on the web and order Ukrainian weapons. That's a fact. I'm not guessing. It's a fact. They could do that today. Like,
ooh, I'm going to get some cool stuff from Ukraine. Just some jerk and just.
So why do you think when your Congress and your favorite Democrats and Republicans voted for aid and weapons and money to go to Ukraine, which is a proxy war provoked by the United States so we could have an economic war with Russia? That's all this is about. We don't care about the people in Ukraine. So when they voted for that, you know, they voted for it without oversight, meaning that they're not going to track how the money they're sending to Ukraine is being spent or the weapons.
To launder it.
And when a senator tried to introduce that in Congress, it got voted down that they wanted to track. They wanted to track the money that they're giving to Ukraine. They wanted to track the weapons they're sending to Ukraine. It got voted down. What does that tell you about the Ukraine funding? Because that it's really about helping people, or is exactly what Julian Assange taught us, that these wars are not meant to be won. These wars are meant to be ongoing.
Forever wars.
And you're a dupe for supporting Ukraine. You've learned nothing from Vietnam. You've learned nothing from the first Iraq war, which is was sold to us on a pack of lies.
Or the second.
And the second Iraq war, which was sold to us on an even bigger pack of lies. Or the Libyan war, which was sold to us on a pack of lies. Or the Afghanistan war, which was 20 years of straight lying, which the Afghan papers revealed, and no one knows about it. The Afghan papers revealed that there was one big grift, the 20-year Afghanistan war. We're over there growing heroin for them.
The people that finance war finance both sides of the war. If you're someone who's smart, you finance the enemy and the patriots. You do both. That's how they make their money. It's real obvious and not conspiratorial, basic history that everyone should be aware of, shouldn't they?
And you somehow got tricked into supporting the Ukraine war because you were propagandized for 7 years by Trump Russiagate. I hate Russia now. Remember when George Bush used to go fishing with Putin? They talked about the Great Reset. Before the WEF, the Great Reset was how we're all friends with. Now Russia has Kentucky Fried Chickens and McDonald's.
Right.
And we're all the same. We're all regular people.
That.
Remember
the
that?
Original Great Reset was, I forgot all about that until you just said it.
That's right. And then the deep state was like, no, we need an enemy. People aren't afraid of the Muslims anymore. We need an enemy.
And the Great Reset is you don't have a home no more. That's what they change it to.
And so they were like, oh, we need an enemy. And why? Because we want to sell more liquefied natural gas to Europe. And now Russia's doing all that. So that's why we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. That's why we started the Ukraine war. That's why we overthrew the Ukraine democratically elected Ukraine government. And people still don't know that. Fucking every moron asshole that I used to do comedy with in Hollywood has no idea about that. And you can't tell them that either. They don't want to know.
You can't tell them that George Soros is in fact a traitor to Jews and a Nazi collaborator. And they'll go, it's anti-Semitic to talk about George Soros, a guy that literally, in 60 Minutes, that one reporter asked him about it back when they didn't all love him because he was handing out money to Democrats and buying off the journalists. He goes, what did you do? He goes, well, yeah, but someone was going to do it. So I did it. So this family made money from confiscating the property of their neighbors. That's how they built their initial wealth.
Let's watch this one more time.
Second fact, not guess, fact is the Ukrainian military is selling a huge percentage, up to half of the arms that we send them. Half. And I'm not guessing about this. I know that for a fact, okay? Not speculation. And they're selling it, and a lot of us winding up with the drug cartels on our border. So this is a crime, what's happening. Our intel agencies are fully aware of this. You tell me they're not profiting from this. Of course, you think the CIA is not profiting from this? Yes, they are. I can't prove that, but I believe that. What they don't know that.
You know, Scheinbaum, the new president of Mexico, tweeted out or was quoted as saying, hey, United States, how are the drug cartels in Mexico ending up with grenade launchers made in the United States? Well, this would be one way.
Yeah. You mean besides Fast and Furious?
I know this, but they don't know this. They know this. And no one is saying it. Like, no American seems aware of this. We're sending these arms to Ukraine, hundreds of billions of dollars, and it's being stolen and sold to our actual enemies. Like, what the? I'm trying not to swear. What is this?
Okay, so if you're for the Ukraine war, you're a sucker who has learned nothing. You've learned nothing from the government and the media lying to you your entire life. You've learned nothing. Hooray, congratulations. You're a useful tool of the war machine. How's it feel?
Get a booster. Get your booster.
Get your booster.
Of President Trump's offer to acquire Gaza. You referred to the Gaza Riviera Resort and Casino not as a scheme, but as a scam. What did you mean?
Because this is going to be paid essentially by the petromonarchies, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, which will be given, according to Trump's idea, free reign to build everything they want in Gaza, which is, by the way, completely illegal. We don't know how this would probably be accomplished. And in the end, the West takes it all. Of course, Trump never says that the emphasis is not exactly the Trump Resort, Casino, Gaza, Riviera, or whatever, built by petromonarchies. It's the unexplored oil and gas deposits of Gaza. And this has been completely absent from this whole kabuki so far. But it's the main.
Has any head of state, has any bona fide diplomat of a country on the planet endorsed to this, besides Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu?
Exactly, Judge. No. And the closest we had, of course, under extreme pressure, King Abdullah from Jordan, which I have to be very careful how to describe him. Politely, he's not exactly popular in his own kingdom. He said that he would take 2,000 very ill and children from Gaza, and that's it. But he condemned the plan. Sisi condemned it. The Arab League condemned it. Everybody in the Arab world condemned it. The Arab Street condemned it. The Lens of Islam condemned it. BRICS countries condemned it. China condemned it. Russia condemned it. So
the Sultan Erdogan.
And Sultan Erdogan, he said that it's completely absurd because the Palestinians have eternal rights to their own lands.
So does, in your mind, do these countries view the Trump feel that Trump would use force to remove them? Let's see. The IDF couldn't remove them. Is Trump going to land a couple of thousand Marines? And are they going to point weapons at people saying it's time for you to go? I don't know where, but it's time for you to go. Is that realistic?
No, it's not. And the problem is this is like a construction in an enormous fictional scenario. This is something that might happen, and it's being sold by Trump directly as what will happen. As he said many times, we'll own Gaza. What rights do the United States have to own Gaza? So nobody's asking this question in detail, and Trump is not volunteering any detailed answer. So he throws this geopolitical grenade on the global stage, and obviously everybody's scurrying around. But when we start looking at the practicalities of actually implementing that, it's absolutely impossible. Or it will, if the beginning of this plan would be implemented, then there will be a revolt all over the Arab world, propelled by Arab public opinion and the lands of Islam, of course. And
what would happen specifically in Jordan and Egypt if they agreed to accept hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees?
Well, Sisi, at least, he went straight to the point. His flat no means that if he would ever agree to it, he will have a civil war in Egypt, obviously. In fact, Sisi proposed a reconstruction coordinated by Egypt, lasting from 3 to 5 years, with input from the UN, non-specified, and the Europeans, maybe European construction companies, who knows. And then it will start from south to north Gaza and rebuild Gaza in a spectrum of 5 years, coordinated by Arab countries. This was decided in a meeting. It's very important who decided in favor of the Egyptian plan. This meeting was, if I remember correctly, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and there was a fifth component that I don't remember at the moment. So this is a collective decision of a significant part of the Arab world. And it's a plan of reconstruction of Gaza without expelling the Palestinians. The problem is, how would Israel react to that?
When Trump was asked if the Palestinians whom he would expel could return and enjoy the Trump-built Gaza, here's what he said. Chris, cut number 5.
Think of it as a real estate development for the future. It would be a beautiful piece of land.
Would the Palestinians have the right to return?
No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing, much better. In other words, I'm talking about building a permanent place for them, because if they have to return now, it will be years before you could ever, it's not habitable. It will be years before it could happen. I'm talking about starting to build, and I think I could make a deal with Jordan. I think I could make a deal with Egypt. You know, we give them billions and billions of dollars a year.
Right, the deal with Jordan, non-starter.
The
deal with Egypt, non-starter. The concept of we can cause these people to leave and they wouldn't have the right to return, non-starter. Here he is on Air Force One when told that his own advisors have said it would take 10 to 15 years to accomplish what you want. Do you envision this project going beyond your presidency? Here's his answer, cut number 1.
Steve Witkoff said that process would take 10 to 15 years. Does your commitment to rebuilding Gaza extend beyond your time in office?
I'm committed to buying and owning Gaza. As far as us rebuilding it, we may give it to other states in the Middle East to build sections of it. Other people may do it through our auspices, but we're committed to owning it, taking it, and making sure that Hamas doesn't move back. There's nothing to move back into. The place is a demolition site.
He's committed to buying it.
Buying and owning it. And owning it.
And owning it. From whom or from what would he buy it?
Exactly.
He don't understand every time he keeps saying Gaza is a demolition site, then yes, Israel are war criminals then. If you're saying that it's wrecked beyond belief, okay, then they definitely war criminals for what they did to Gaza.
And terminology, Judge, is very, very important. He's using the same terminology that Israeli not so secret plans. The first one, in fact, is from October 13, a few days after October 7, 2023. Demolition. And it's the same language of a plan, a four-stage plan that was circulating in Netanyahu's cabinet in May last year, where the key terminology was demolition. And after the demolition, they would expel the Palestinians, raze it to the ground, and obviously to the benefit of Israeli settlers. What Trump is saying that he's not saying who would inhabit this built by Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, New Gaza. Obviously not the Palestinians, and he said that many, many times over. They will be going to a new wonderful location where they can live in a sort of Trump-style condo land. So who will live in this new Gaza? He's not saying it.
Yeah. How does China and how does the Kremlin view statements from President Trump that are obviously nonsensical, not run past his national security team, impractical, or even impossible?
The official responses by Minister of Foreign Affairs of both China and Russia, strict China, Russia. In fact, they usually discuss this. It's part of the special relationship as well. They have a unified position on Palestine. Sovereign Palestinian state, Palestinian right of return for Palestinians, and no manner whatsoever of trying to ethnic cleanse Palestinians from Gaza and from the West Bank as well. But this is the language of diplomatic rationality, which is practiced by Beijing and Moscow. What we have from the US now is a completely deranged reality show, which has some contact with reality here and there, but overall is a construct. So what Trump came up with, okay, this is being defended by Trump 2.0 functionaries as, he's thinking outside the box. But you cannot think outside the box when you turn a genocide and an ethnic cleansing operation into a real state opportunity.
Has the foreign policy of the United States of America with respect to Israel and Gaza changed on January 20th?
Not necessarily. It's even more brutal, in fact. What was until a few weeks ago, the US and the collective West, what I call NATO-stan, they were weaponizing, supporting, but they were keeping a certain distance to the ongoing genocide. Now we have the transformation, the metastasization of the genocide into something completely different in a follow the money vein, without any regards to geography, history, and culture, which is something that, and then we can make the direct comparison of this Forever Wars chapter in West Asia to Russia, Ukraine. And before the fateful telephone call today between Putin and Trump, Ryabkov, number 2 of the Russian Foreign Ministry, he said a few days ago, and this was absolutely essential, I use it in my latest column, this quote. He said that we are ready to discuss everything with the United States, but in a spirit of dialogue and respecting history and geography. So history and geography applies from Gaza to Ukraine and Russia as well. But this is the rational approach. Yes, Judge, please go ahead.
We will take a break for a second. We have a new sponsor that I want to welcome called Home Title Lock. But when we come back, we will transfer from Gaza to the Kremlin, Russian culture, and the Kremlin itself.
Well, Trump, in fact, he said that he loves the Russian people. So we assume that he has at least a superficial knowledge of Russian culture. And of course, he came to Russia a few times. There's a photo of him with Ivana in St. Petersburg circulating on the net. I think it was 1987 when they visited Russia. He's not adversarial to Russia. Members of Trump 2.0, they are saying it out loud, in fact, that Russia is a competitor. They do not describe Russia as a threat, as the previous administration did, and they see points of contact that can be discussed. Ryabkov, once again, he said earlier this week, this was before the phone call, very important. Russia-US relations are on the verge of rupture. This coming from a top-level diplomat is extremely serious. And this is something that we have been hearing from Ryabkov. I heard this over a year ago, personally. From Lavrov, when we talked to us roughly a year ago, he said more or less the same thing. And he was appalled because there were always very good channels.
Why do the Russians believe that there is a rupture or a coming rupture in the relationship with the United States? Is it because Tony Blinken and Joe Biden wouldn't speak to their counterparts for 3 years?
It goes way beyond that, Judge, because of the demonization campaign against not only against Russia in terms of culture, in terms of civilization, in terms of civilization state, and even the Russian people. This under Trump is going to be slightly different. In this past 24 hours, there were some, I would say, auspicious signs that there might be a relatively adult dialogue, and of course, involving direct Putin and Trump phone calls, and probably a meeting. There could be a meeting next month, March, for instance. But the great problem is after all these years of Russophobia and demonization of Russia, and this didn't start after the SMO. This comes from 2014, from Maidan, and even before. And we can say that it has been going on for the past 30 years or so, since the fall of the Soviet Union. How are you going to have a dialogue, as the Minister of Foreign Relations here is always very specific, mutual respect and real dialogue? So coming from the still exceptionalist power. So from Trump, this would demand a lot. And in only a matter of few days or weeks. And what does he have to offer to Russia in terms of his much hyped, I'm going to end this war? There's going to be...
Well, if you listen to two of his closest aides,
yes,
Sebastian Gorka and General Kellogg,
yeah,
they offer threats.
Threats, exactly. And General Kellogg, by the way, Judge, is viewed here diplomatically as a Cold War relic, and undiplomatically, like the dinner I was last night talking geoeconomics, as an imbecile. And in the corridors of the Kremlin and the corridors of the agencies here, yes, he's regarded as an idiot. How can you have a negotiator trying to, organize the lineaments of a dialogue to end a war, and you start insulting one of the parties, which is the case of Kellogg? So obviously he's unprepared for this task. So this will have to be conducted personally by President Trump himself, assuming he has anything to offer Russia, and he doesn't. He has a
the Secretary of Defense, either on his own or with instructions from the White House, made a public statement. We'll run this in just a second. Yesterday, which should be pleasing to the ears of the Kremlin. You tell me what you think. Chris, cut number 16.
A durable peace for Ukraine must include robust security guarantees to ensure that the war will not begin again. This must not be Minsk 3.0. That said, the United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. There also must be robust international oversight of the line of contact. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
If that is credible, Ukraine will never be in NATO, pleasing to the Kremlin. U.S. troops will not be deployed to Ukraine, pleasing to the Kremlin. But European troops will be deployed to Ukraine, not pleasing to the Kremlin. You can take it from there. You're the expert.
In many aspects, let's say 1 minute of Hegseth saying what he said is groundbreaking. It's the first time that we hear, can you imagine, this guy leads the Pentagon and he's saying there's not going to be a Minsk 3. Can you imagine listening to something like this until a few days ago? Absolutely out of the question. So this is enormous. What he said about the peacekeeping forces, the Russians already sent their messages through the subterranean diplomatic channels, let's put it this way. It depends on how they're going to be composed and where they're going to be placed. And the Russians would accept a UN peacekeeping force, but not an European peacekeeping force, because the European peacekeeping force means a Ukrainian supporter peacekeeping force.
What do you think he's talking about when he says non-European troops? Where would they come? Not U.S. and not Europe. Where the hell would they come from?
Judge, maybe this would be code for a UN peacekeeping force, but we are extrapolating. He didn't say it, but it opens the possibility that they would be UN peacekeeping troops. And in this case, they would be acceptable for both sides, including Russia, right?
Wow.
But the key, I would say that the absolute key argument is no Minsk 3. This means a real end of the war, because here in Moscow, at the level of the agencies, at the level of foreign policy experts and the Security Council, they know that NATO will try to go after Russia after a few years. There are different dates according to internal NATO documents. Could be 2028, 2029, 2030. But it's practically certain that they will try to go back against Russia later if this is on pause, if the war is on pause.
Does the Kremlin,
yes,
the Kremlin trust or respect Hegseth? He is, after all, a super Zionist who, if he had his way, would lead the troops personally invading Gaza.
Exactly. Let's say it's too early to tell. I'm sure if they pay attention to the clip that you just played, there are elements of rationality in what he said that will be extremely welcomed by the Kremlin. But it comes back to the same point, Judge. The big discussion that Putin really wants, and then he tried to have this discussion in December 2021, is indivisibility of security for the NATO space and post-Soviet space, and let's say this part of Eurasia, Western Eurasia. We are not sure if Trump will be able to sit down on the same table with Putin, start discussing that, because this means a new organization of spheres of influence and respecting Russia's sphere of influence, which is all across Eurasia. We still don't know if Trump 2.0 is going to respect Russian spheres of influence and China's spheres of influence. which brings us to the good old, is there going to be a new Yalta? For the moment, the perspective is less than zero.
Pepe, a pleasure to chat with you. An absolute pleasure. I know it literally is midnight.
Washington of strikes on Iran's nuclear site that Iran is going to hit very, 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 very hard. So, Professor Varadi, why would Iran make this statement now, given that many people have written off Iran as not being forthright enough? Why then is Iran speaking this defiantly when Trump is talking about a possible deal and not a lot of activity around Iran itself right now? Not a lot of talk so much.
Well, actually, that's a good point. If the Iranian defenses were weakened the way in which the Americans like to claim and the Israeli regime like to claim, does anyone really think that Netanyahu and the Americans would refrain from striking Iran? Of course not. They would use that opportunity to strike again and again and again. If Iran did not have adequate defenses, and if it did not have adequate offensive capabilities, they would never refrain from attacking. So I think that's pretty clear. And again, as I said, the Iranians, we all recall how Iran struck Israel with almost 200 missiles. They almost all went through their defenses. And if the United States makes a foolish move, the Iranians will strike very hard. And it's very simple for Iran to be very blunt. The small, tiny Arab dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, which host U.S. bases, if anything happens, they will no longer be exporting oil or gas. And that would bring the global energy markets, that would bring about that would create chaos. The price of oil would go up to maybe $300, $400 a barrel. That would lead to a global economic depression. And so all of those oil and gas facilities in the Persian Gulf, all of those tankers are easily destroyed. It's a very small, if anyone looks at the Persian Gulf, it's narrow and long. And so everything is very vulnerable. If the Americans could not defeat Ansarullah in the Red Sea after 15, 16 months, then there's not a chance in the world that they're going to be able to defeat the Iranians, especially since the Iranians have been preparing themselves for such a day, for such a possibility for decades. And just today, the Iranians have shown that they have another underground missile base. So the Iranians have these missile bases across the world, across the country, across the Persian Gulf. And I think the Americans recognize that. So the Iranians, I think it is a show of force, and we've seen that over the past few weeks, the Iranians have been carrying out extensive maneuvers. It is a show of strength, both to telling the Trump and his people that any mistake in this region would be fatal for the global economy. It would be fatal for the U.S. economy. No one would win.
It seems like the Western media is actually right now in the throes of an effort to promote increasing escalations on Iran, which may have prompted Agachi, the foreign minister of Iran, to make these comments about how an all-out war would occur if its nuclear sites are hit by the United States and or Israel. Because at the moment, you just look at the headlines, there's rumors about an 1,800-mile radius nuclear site producing nuclear weapons that can reach Europe. There's also a lot of talk about how to prevent Iran from producing nuclear weapons. Is the United States and Israel right now gearing up as they regroup from this embarrassment that just happened in Gaza? Are they gearing up to try to provoke and maybe escalate with Iran as the Trump administration moves forward, Professor Morandi?
Well, this news about Iran developing a nuclear weapon, that's all fake news. That's the sort of fake news that you're going to see from the Western media whenever the West wants to put pressure on some adversary. We saw that in the Iraq War. When they invaded Iraq, they lied about chemical weapons, they lied about nuclear weapons, they lied about Al Qaeda. We saw them lie their way into Libya. That we saw them, just in the dirty war in Syria. Tulsi Gabbard has exposed a lot of the reality of what happened during the when she was in the testifying, or when she was trying to get her confirmation in the confirmation hearing. She exposed the fact that what we've been saying all along, that this was a dirty war, that the chemical weapon, the claims that President Assad used chemical weapons or the Syrian government used chemical weapons was a lie. All of these things that we've been saying for 13 years, and the Western media has been just repeating because that's what their masters have been telling them to do. All of them have been exposed. So these are just new lies that Western media is putting out because they have a vested interest in these, or those people behind the media, they have a vested interest in intensifying tensions. And without a doubt, the Israelis would like to see a war. They would be more than willing to sacrifice the United States or the Europeans or the global economy for their own selfish interests. They never cared about the West. They've destroyed the image and the credibility of the West by carrying out this Holocaust for the last 15, 16 months. The West has paid the price in the sense that they have no credibility across the world. The world sees the West as barbaric and inhumane, the Western elites and the regimes that are in power. So Israel, is more than willing to sacrifice everyone for itself. But the United States does recognize Iran's power. Remember, when the United States took Iraq, when they took Afghanistan, they had literally surrounded Iran. And Iran back then was much weaker. Iran back then was much weaker than it is today. And even then, the United States did not dare attack Iran. So the country was surrounded. Iran was in a much more vulnerable position. The United States was at the height of its power. It was the global hyperpower. But it didn't attack Iran because they knew it wasn't a war they could win. Everyone would lose. Today, Iran is much more powerful, and the United States is relatively weaker. They've been losing war after war, spending countless trillions of dollars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and elsewhere, and now in Ukraine. So this is not a war that the Americans can fight against Iran and win.
As you were talking, Professor Morandi, it reminded me that, there's been more than a few people who've been very critical of Iran, even those who supported Palestine and the axis of resistance as a whole, about the slowness of their response, and even about their potential, the leadership under Pezeshkian, wanting to negotiate with the United States around a potential nuclear deal, sanctions, etc. Some even accusing Iran of liberalizing, going that far. But so far, the Iranian government appears to have taken a posture of there's really no possibility of talks at the moment with the United States, given what the U.S. is currently offering and how it's currently behaving. What have you made of this in terms of the overall posture of Iran toward the U.S. as the Trump administration has entered, and this talk about Iran's defiance and resistance toward the U.S. and Israeli regime versus its willingness to negotiate?
Well, if we go back to 2015 during the nuclear negotiations, even though I believe that the nuclear deal was pretty flawed, and that it could have been better negotiated, and that the Rouhani administration put the negotiators in a very bad position for a host of reasons, which I don't want to get into right now. But even back then, when Iran was weaker than today and the United States was stronger, the United States and Iran, when they signed the deal, it had nothing to do with Iran, the axis of resistance. Iran's support for Hezbollah had nothing to do with the deal. Iran's support for the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq had nothing to do with the nuclear deal. Iran's support for Ansarullah, or what the West likes to call the Houthis in Yemen and the Yemeni government, was not a part of any deal. So even if at some point the Iranians do negotiate with the Americans, that has nothing to do with Iran's support for the axis of resistance. I find it very strange that some people say that Iran is using the axis of resistance in order to strike a deal with the Americans. Well, if Iran didn't have the axis, if Iran didn't support the axis of resistance in the first place, if it did not create the axis of resistance in the first place, it wouldn't have a problem with the United States to have the need for some sort of deal today. Iran has been living with maximum pressure sanctions for 15 years now, or even more. And we've had sanctions since the beginning of the revolution. So since the beginning of the revolution, we had sanctions, and they just increased year after year. And Iran has been supporting these groups, funding these groups, so they pay a heavy price for the axis of resistance. So that's nonsense. And these claims made against Iran are usually made by people who do nothing for the resistance themselves. At most, they fire off a few tweets, but they don't do anything. They don't force their governments to change their stance. All the governments in the region, or at least most of them, are collaborating with the Israelis. Turkey, the Turkish government is doing business as usual, sending oil from Baku. Baku has just signed a deal with the Israeli regime to buy 10% of an investment in a gas field in the Mediterranean. Egypt is doing business with the Israelis, so is Jordan, so is the Emirates. So, those people who are making these claims against Iran, I think what they're basically doing is they're trying to whitewash or they're trying to muddy the water so that people don't look at what their own governments have been doing and what the governments that they've been supporting have been doing. They're trying to whitewash these regimes. So Iran will continue. I mean, I don't know if there's going to be negotiations between Iran and the United States. Iran will be much tougher with the United States than it was in 2015, because we saw how the United States violated its commitments back then. And it's not just with Iran. The Minsk Accords is a similar experience. The Americans and the Europeans, in general, they are unreliable. We saw how the former German Chancellor Merkel admitted that they had never intended to abide by the Minsk Accords. We saw Hollande say the same thing soon afterwards, and then the former president of Ukraine. This is how the West deals with the rest of the world. So if there are negotiations at some point, and right now the Iranians are being very tough. You can see, as you rightly pointed out, what the interview that the foreign minister made shows that the Iranians are not going to be giving any unnecessary concessions to anyone. So at this stage, I think that nothing is really happening between Iran and the United States. If at some point the Americans decide to be sane and put a very reasonable offer to the Iranians, then it's possible that there will be negotiations. But as I said, that has nothing to do with the axis of resistance, just as it never had anything to do with the axis of resistance in the past. And one final point is that if Iran wanted a nuclear weapon, Iran would have had it a long time ago. Iran is today, thanks to Trump, one of the 10 most advanced countries in nuclear energy. one of the 10 most advanced countries in the world. So Iran could develop a nuclear weapon whenever it wants. And we know how Iranian drone and missile technology, how advanced that is, and how developed Iran is in that regard. It's very simple for Iran. The point is that the Iranians never wanted a nuclear weapon because the nuclear weapons are horrible for the world. And not only would they cause instability because then other countries would want them, but also Iran just doesn't like these sort of weapons. I think it's very difficult for some people in the West to comprehend that the Islamic Republic of Iran is much more humane than Western regimes. And let me give you an example. During the 1980s, when the West was giving Saddam Hussein chemical weapons to use against Iran, and I survived two chemical attacks, one mustard gas attack in 1988 and one nerve agent in 1984 during the Khaybar operation. The Iranian commanders and leaders went to the leader back then and said we should develop chemical weapons, just like Saddam Hussein. And he said no. He said no, we are not going to develop and use chemical weapons. So Iran paid a price. And Western countries not only gave Saddam Hussein chemical weapons, they banned Iran, they prevented other countries from selling Iran gas masks. They prevented Iran from obtaining the materials to defend themselves from chemical weapons. That is how Western regimes behave. And that's how Iran behaved. And today, those same regimes are supporting genocide in Gaza, and Iran is the lone country, alongside Yemen, of course, that is standing against the genocide. So whenever Westerners try to, Western elites and think tanks and media, when they talk about human rights in Iran, I always find it ridiculous because I survived chemical attacks. I couldn't breathe because of chemical attacks. I lived through chemical attacks. I'll never believe any Western media outlet that pretends that they care about human dignity and human rights. So when the Iranians say that they don't want nuclear weapons because it is immoral and it kills innocent people, they're very serious. And history has shown that they're consistent. However, the Iranians have said that if there's an existential threat to the country, then they will change their nuclear posture. They've been very explicit about that, which is understandable. So that's not where Iran wants to go. And Americans, if they're foolish enough, then Iran will be forced to change its position.
And it's an extraordinary position, Professor Marandi, given the dirty little secret of the fact that Israel is in possession of nuclear weapons, and that Israel has shown through its behavior in the region that it is willing to go to great lengths militarily to get what it wants, to the point of now what we witness is genocide. So it's an extraordinary position for Iran. And if you could comment on that, on the fact that the biggest players, Israel and of course the United States too, both are nuclear powers with nuclear weapons, and both, while Israel hasn't necessarily used one that we know of, the United States has, and Israel has a long record of absolute aggression in the region, which obviously has Iran on very high alert. Your thoughts?
Well, the Iranian nuclear program, the peaceful nuclear program, is very well protected because the United States is a lawless regime, because the Europeans are lawless regimes. They've constantly threatened Iran with military strikes over the years. All options are on the table. The West can threaten countries whenever they like, because for them, international law means nothing. For them, the international law is for the others. It's for the non-Western governments. They have to abide by commitments. They have to abide by the international law. The nuclear deal with Iran was a good example. Obama, from day one, began to violate the deal, but the Iranians were forced to abide by their commitments. Of course, in future, that's not going to happen. Iran won't accept that sort of deal. But the point is that the West sees itself as above the law. They see themselves as exceptional. American exceptionalism is basically that very same thing. They see themselves as having more rights than others, more privileges than others. And that's why the Iranians have been forced to protect their nuclear program and build it very, very deep underground so that if the Americans or the Israelis or anyone else tries to bomb it, they will fail to destroy it. So that, and of course, Iran has extensive air defenses around it too. So the smart, and as you pointed out, that not only have the Americans used chemical weapons, but the Israeli regime is a genocidal regime. And this genocidal regime has already had senior government officials threaten and people with nuclear weapons. We saw a minister in the Israeli cabinet speak about using a nuclear weapon in Gaza at the beginning of the genocide. And on numerous occasions, Netanyahu, this genocidal monster, went to where they have their nuclear program and made threats against Iran from there, basically implying that that the Israeli regime can use nuclear weapons. So I think Iran is in a position. It's being very smart. They have the capability, and that itself is deterrence. It's a threshold state, but they don't want the bomb. And as I said, if they wanted it, they would have had it a long time ago. And there's nothing that the Americans could have done about it, and there's nothing they can do about it today. And that, I think, the smartest thing is to do one's best to prevent nuclear war, because that would bring about the end of humanity. If there's a nuclear exchange anywhere in this world, that will have huge consequences. And of course, if it's between the Americans and the Chinese and the Russians, that would bring an end to everything. But a nuclear war, whether between India and Pakistan or in our region, that will have consequences for the entire globe that will be irreversible.
Several significant moves happened today that prove that Israel and the United States are only talking, being loudmouths and threatening with nothing substantial on the ground. The Israelis allowed entry of more than 158 trucks to North Gaza, a significant number on its own, to the northern part of Gaza, only with temporary housing equipment for the population. In addition, Qatar added 15 million liters of fuel to be sent to Gaza in the short-coming period. These two moves on their own indicate that Israel started to implement the demands of the Palestinian resistance led by Hamas, not only to compensate for the shortage that they had, but to comply moving forward when it comes to the entry of basic necessities in Gaza as agreed upon with the ceasefire agreement. Hamas, a couple of days back, said that they are suspending the release of Israeli prisoners of war on Saturday because of lack of Israeli compliance when it comes to the humanitarian clauses of the ceasefire agreement. They said that Israel is not sending enough tents, hardly any tents actually, no mobile housing whatsoever, only a fraction of the fuel necessary, medical supplies and heavy equipment required to remove the rubble and to evacuate the bodies and start the rebuilding process. Now, clearly, and after intense talks coming between the mediators in Israel, these things started to happen on the ground. However, all of that is happening, but the countries, the Arab countries and the Muslim countries as well, and international countries too, are not taking the talks of Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump lightly. The important thing that's happening here is two moves being conducted and taken by Egypt and Iran. Egypt is leading an Arab front, Iran is leading a Muslim front, and we're going to get to the Israeli pressure and statements that came, which led to the Israeli submission and bowing down as well to the Palestinian resistance when it comes to the aid. We're going to start off with Egypt. For the past few days, Donald Trump has been escalating the tone, has been raising the tone with Egypt and with Jordan too, threatening with sanctions, threatening to cut the aid, but Egypt is not backing down. They received a harsh message from Egypt, the Trump administration, that they will not be coordinating with them. The Egyptian president will not be going to the United States so long as the displacement option is on the table when it comes to Donald Trump. This is a red line. Sinai is a red line, displacement is a red line, and Egypt is a red line. And it's not only talks. Egypt, apart from the drills that they've had yesterday and published next to the Rafah borders, now the Egyptian defense minister ordered military brigades in the Sinai and Rafah regions to maintain the highest level of readiness for war. That was published on the Israeli radio. And also, the commander of the 3rd Field Army, Hisham Shindi, affirmed the commitment of the 3rd Field Army's fighters to achieving the highest levels of efficiency and combat readiness, prepared to take all tasks to go into war regardless of the sacrifices required. These people are prepared for war and they're not bowing down to the pressure of the United States. This is coming at a military level alongside all of the other moves of Egypt when it comes to military and security. However, they're also having very intense diplomatic moves. The diplomatic moves are intended to cover all bases and not give the Trump administration any argument whatsoever when it comes to Gaza. We spoke about the summit that's being prepared to take place in Egypt with all of the Arab states participating. However, Egypt is not finding that enough. They have another summit that's due to take place with key players within the Arab states. That's intended to prepare for the coming Arab summit, and it's also following a previous summit during which the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, the Palestinian Authority, and Qatar participated in, outright rejecting the plan of Donald Trump. The Trump administration, although they're having all of these threats against Egypt and the sanctions, that means nothing for them, because with the aid, 1.3 billion, you have 110 approximately million Egyptians. For every Egyptian pays $11 to the state a year, you're making up the USA. It's insignificant. That amount hasn't changed in about 40, 50 years. It was something before, it's nothing now, especially the requirements of Egypt for the size of Egypt and for the military demands of Egypt. And also, even if Donald Trump has sanctions, they have backdoors. Egypt is a BRICS member. Egypt has backdoors. And these sanctions, if anything, these US sanctions, they elevated the countries that were subject to them. They made them become more creative, more self-reliant, more productive, and create more alliances. And that's not going to be a problem for Egypt. So Egypt is prepared on the military level, on the political level, and on the economic level as well, in addition to bringing proposals. But Trump said, what's your proposal? Hey, we have proposals. They're gonna close every argument. The Egyptian side declared that they're gonna have 2 proposals to rebuild Gaza within 3 to 5 years, with all of the Palestinian population remaining there. All of the Palestinian population remaining there with the full support of Egypt. Egyptian engineers, Egyptian planning, everything is sorted. 3 to 5 years, everything's going to be sorted. And we know exactly how much that's going to cost. With more countries, of course, calling for Israel to pay. The Turkish president saying Israel has to pay, and other countries too are applying pressure for participation. You destroyed it, you have to pay it. But that's a different story. When it comes to Iran, Iran is leading the Muslim front. The Iranians have been on massive campaigns lately, with the Iranian foreign minister visiting 10 significant countries when it comes to the Muslim world, including Egypt, of course, but also Turkey, Pakistan, Tunisia, Algeria, Malaysia, and the necessity, they were stressing the necessity to have a united Muslim front to confront the Trump position. And the Hamas delegation that was in Iran several days back, also to ensure a united Palestinian front when it comes to that plan of Donald Trump and how to reject it. The senior delegation of Hamas, led by Ismail Darwish, who is the head of the Shura Council of Hamas, they met with the supreme leader, and some of them met with the Iranian president as well. Iran believes this cannot be done, according to reports in Iran, with refusal of these countries if all of these countries refuse the proposal of Donald Trump and they have decisive action planned, nothing can happen. And if we're arguing if Donald Trump is serious, it's a separate story. But these people, these countries are taking the statement seriously, and they should. However, without disclosure of the movements that they will be taking. And that's something very important, because they shouldn't be declaring up until they come and have a strong position to confront this US-Israeli arrogance. Iran is also conducting military drills with Oman for a potential action near the Hormuz Strait. Okay, Iran, several weeks back, they had drills on their own in the Hormuz Strait. During the genocide, they had drills with China and Russia too, with other observers as well. But recently they had drills in the Hormuz Strait, during which they were forcing everyone to comply. There were hostile countries' ships. They were dictating their moves in the Hormuz Strait. This coordination with Oman, is intended to prepare for something that might escalate even further. And the United States is not even saying anything about that. Why are they not saying anything about that? And why did they not mention anything about the UAV that Iran took down over the Gulf approximately a week ago? These are messages being sent from Iran without any response. And these moves coming from Iran against potentially US drone, this was suspected to be US drone, although of course US did not admit, indicate that the US is not actually intending to have any war. What war? It's only barking. And so is Israel. They're having all of these threats against Egypt, for example. Is the Israeli army prepared to fight with an Egyptian army? No way. These people are exhausted. They're done. They're roasted. They've been roasted by armed men with flip-flops. So what are they going to do with the Egyptian army? The biggest army in the region. Not only that, so we have Egypt ready on a political, military, and economic level, Iran ready and preparing on a military and a political level as well. Economically, they're sorted too. So both of these countries leading the Arab and Muslim fronts when it comes to confronting the position of Donald Trump and his grotesque, abhorrent proposition. But there were also other statements too. China saying Gaza belongs to the Palestinians. North Korea even. No, hold on, this is a threat. This is theft, saying North Korea, raising the bar as well. All of that indicates that Trump made himself very lonely, alone. This guy secluded completely. He's making himself an alien globally, and it's so shameful. It's embarrassing what Donald Trump is doing. All the talk about make America great again, America first. So far, we've seen nothing but Zion first and bootlicking for Benjamin Netanyahu. In the meantime, the things that led to this Israeli bowing down to the Palestinian resistance came after several things happened in Israel. There were, of course, massive protests and unprecedented police brutality against the protesters in Israel, blaming Benjamin Netanyahu, telling him, you're going to kill everyone if you continue, and it's your fault. You were responsible for the 7th of October. Get us out of this mess and continue with the deal. And the police dragging the people in the streets, imprisoning, beating people up. But there were also statements coming from senior, sensitive officials inside of Israel in very sensitive positions, very senior positions, warning and taking a position and actually saying, hold on a second, Hamas are right, we are breaching. So the first one is New York Times quoted an Israeli official and mediators. They said Hamas is right. And we know the New York Times, by the way, and their alliances. Hamas is right, they said, that Israel did not fulfill its obligations under the ceasefire agreement. These are people acting now. This is how serious this is. Then the former Mossad prisoners and missing persons division chief, Rami Igra. Rami Igra also came up with very interesting statements saying that this Donald Trump plan is totally unrealistic and unsubstantiated. Why? Is it unsubstantiated? He said, because if Trump offered Tel Aviv residents green cards, their response to immigration would be greater than the Gaza residents. You don't understand the Gaza residents. These people, he called them, these are jihadist people. They stick to their ground. They believe fully in their right. But it's the Israelis who will leave. If they offered green cards to Tel Avivians, they would be leaving, not the Gazan populations. And that Donald Trump and his statements are completely disconnected from reality. Totally disconnected and delusional, these statements. You're talking about a senior person who dealt with previous cases of missing or kidnapped Israelis. And it wasn't only him. Who else made statements? The Shabak head. What did he say? He said, he calls for the cabinet to give mediators the opportunity to solve issues with Hamas. And we're clearly seeing them solved. They are being solved. 150 aid trucks to North Gaza, by the way. Again, this is a very significant number for North Gaza. 150 trucks, they were barely giving them water the other day. Even with all of the aid in, they were making everything difficult. But after the Netzarim was liberated, more things came in, but Israel still stopped the main things to do with like tents and for people to have at least somewhere, at least a shelter, somewhere to protect them from the rain, at least, if not from the cold, right? Some people were dying from the cold, yet still sticking to their land. And it wasn't only the head of the Shabak. The IDF Broadcasting Authority stated, based on an official in Israel, who did not say if he was like in the politics or the military, but the Israeli army broadcasting, they said, hold on a second, Netanyahu is saying all hell, yeah, with Trump, he's on the bandwagon with Donald Trump and this arrogance that, yeah, we'll go in all-scale war with Gaza, and this cat saying that, yeah, prepare for full deployment, we're going to go back, we're going to smack Hamas and what have you. They're saying returning all of the prisoners with military action became a complicated and almost impossible thing. All of these statements are coming from Israelis in these positions, these figures, totally contradicting the moves of Benjamin Netanyahu and, of course, his radical allies, completely opposing them. These people want to continue with the ceasefire, and they're saying, yes, we are wrong, and yes, we should give more aid to Hamas as we agreed upon in the ceasefire agreement, which is clearly happening. 158 trucks, exceptional number, temporary housing or shelters. Qatar declaring them sending 15 million liters of fuel in the short coming period, again, today, and that wouldn't be unless it's coordinated with Israel, because they would have to coordinate with Israel to get them into Gaza, meaning it's Israel bowing down again with the fuel alongside the shelters as well. And all of that came after intense talks. So whilst we had Trump barking and Netanyahu barking, they were still talking. It was all show for the media and pretending, having this wide boy and bully approach. Okay, this is proving that Israel is bowing down to the demands of the Hamas, who are simply asking Israel to comply. Hamas are not asking Israel to do anything extraordinary. The only reason they've done this move is only to tell Israel, comply. That's it. Comply and compensate for the shortage and breaches of the same ceasefire agreement that you signed and went against. Over 470 Israeli breaches. And the numbers are a clear indication of this. The numbers of aid that's going in with the level of trucks, 15 million liters of fuel, all of these things are very important. In the meantime, they're lowering the tone in Israel. And this is also meaning that the Trump administration, Trump and his clowns, they're still barking, indicating that this is a show again. Nothing but loudmouths trying to portray an image of strength and victory that does not and will not exist. However, these statements are still being taken seriously by everyone, by the Palestinians, by the Arabs, by the Muslim world, everyone globally. Everyone is seeing this shameful show, this shameful circus. With these threats, completely being unsubstantiated due to the lack of backing and evidence to support them. Trump is trying to play business in politics, start high to try and get to where he wants. However, even what he wants, which could potentially be US control over Gaza for financial gain and for oil and gas exploration coordination with Israel off the Gaza shores, even that would be something that's not necessarily going to be accepted anyway. Even if he's trying to reach that without the displacement, by the way, and he's using the displacement as a start high, right? To get to where I want. Even if that is the aim of Donald Trump, having America controlling Gaza, buying Gaza, whatever it is, and displacing the Palestinians is not necessarily something he wants, despite him repeatedly saying that. And notwithstanding, of course, the severity and grotesqueness of such preposterous propositions, this simply will not be going ahead. What we're seeing now is Israel backing down, submitting to the demands of Hamas. All of these moves could be indicating that we are going to continue this ceasefire, even with all of this talk of Donald Trump and of the escalation. The next few days will show us exactly where things are going. Either we will see more of this aid coming in or more light tones coming from Israel, Trump pretending that he made Hamas submit, or Israel portraying Hamas as, oh no, now they're going to release them again. Because from an Israeli perspective, by the way, now in Israeli mainstream media, they're not really bothered about the number that they're going to release on Saturday, so long as someone's being released. This is the concern. Now, Hamas petrified them. Hamas made everyone scared in Israel. Hold on. Is it going to stop or what? But from an Israeli perspective, neither Netanyahu nor anyone else said anything about releasing all of the prisoners, like Donald Trump, by the way. They said prisoners. And Hamas, from their perspective, said we're complying with the agreement. We're complying with the agreement so long as the enemy does. The next few days will show if this is headed towards an escalation or not. However, the moves that are being taken, both by Egypt and by Iran, by other, of course, international countries, including this primarily the Arab Muslim world, will still be going ahead. And these moves will be important to send the message to both Donald Trump and Netanyahu that any ambitions and any dreams in Gaza will be completely eliminated.
They saw the big meeting between Donald Trump and King Abdullah II of Jordan at the White House. The first head-to-head between the two leaders since Trump declared he was either buying or seizing Gaza. He can't seem to decide which he's doing. And Jordan, who have threatened war on Israel if any attempt is made to force the Gazan people into their territory, which is all very uncharacteristic for Jordan, isn't it? Largely a westernized Arab nation as they are in so many ways, including in their political alliances, another product of British imperialism, as it actually is. So a lot of people and numerous news outlets as well, and not just mainstream ones either, have been looking at Abdullah sitting next to Trump. So I'm listening to Trump continue to talk about seizing Gaza, saw the two men shake hands, and whilst there can be no denying that surely this was a humiliation for Jordan and for Abdullah, something else far less well reported has gone on as well, in which, despite the politeness of the exchange, points more to Jordan's stance not having changed at all. And if Israel and Trump have been looking at this as a win for them, the complete opposite is probably a lot closer to the truth.
I think we're making some very good progress.
Mr. President, you said before that the U.S. would buy Gaza, and today you just said we're not going to buy Gaza.
We're not going to have to buy. We're going to have Gaza. We don't have to buy. There's nothing to buy. We will have Gaza.
What does that mean?
No reason to buy. There is nothing to buy. It's Gaza. It's a war-torn area. We're going to take it. We're going to hold it. We're going to cherish it. We're going to get it going eventually, where a lot of jobs are going to be created for the people in the Middle East.
It's got to be for the people in the Middle East. But I think it could be a diamond. It could be an absolute tremendous asset for the Middle East. And you're going to have peace. It's going to bring peace in the Middle East. Gaza.
Right. So that was the copper-toned crisis creator passing himself off as the leader of the free world. Donald Trump sat there next to King Abdullah II of Jordan, talking about seizing territory that doesn't belong to him, freedom only going as far as his own to do what he likes, it seems. And the Jordanian king was sat there looking rather meek. Listening to it, it's not a good look for him at all, really, especially when much of the world regards him as a fence-sitter at best and a quasi-ally of the likes of Trump and Western imperialism at worst. And all the handshakes and politeness do not reflect well, despite the bombastic claims coming from Jordan and Abdullah in recent days and weeks since Trump floated his Gaza seizure idea, saying it'd be a declaration of war if Gazans were forced into Jordan. But behind video clips like that one and opinion pieces being penned by Western news outlets regarding the meeting as a success for Trump, as Jordan's king looked weak, there's a matter of what has been said in those discussions behind the scenes. And I go as far as to say Abdullah came with a game plan, actually. One he mightn't have had a lot of time to prepare for, since Trump, just hours before his arrival in the US, was talking about buying Gaza and reiterating his statement that Jordan and Egypt were going to take the people from Gaza and that they would not be allowed back to Gaza again afterwards. I'll come back to that in a moment, though. Now, all this isn't to say that I think Abdullah has handled this visit well. I do not think he has. He's appeared too placating, too friendly. You can argue diplomacy, but then you have to remember what Trump is demanding here, that Jordan and Egypt become partners in his and Israel's ethnic cleansing of the people of Gaza. And with the West Bank being softened up for total annexation at the same time, will it even stop at the people of Gaza? Therefore, to be too pally-pally here, it's a dangerous game to be playing for Abdullah, especially when he spoke of finding a way to make things work, that coming across as decidedly pro-Trump, when actually he did also make the point that what needed to work was Trump being able to work with all of the Arab nations to present a plan that everyone would find acceptable when all the Arab nations have rejected Trump's proposal so far. Abdullah would have done himself a great service to have said this on camera, just said no to Trump about his crackpot land grab and displacement of an entire people, but he didn't. And he's going to have to deal with that. It hasn't helped Jordan's image of taking a neutral stance and playing the part of Switzerland still in the face of Israel's genocide of Gaza up until now, when they are suddenly directly affected themselves. Abdullah never once said, despite being pressed, however, that he accepted Trump's plan, just that Egypt was coming up with a response that would be put to other Arab nations for discussion, which would then be discussed in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, leaders due to meet on the 27th of February, apparently. So it's unlikely to be a situation that will resolve itself very quickly, and certainly not before the Gaza ceasefire itself likely collapses at noon on Saturday. Egypt, for its part, well, they've cancelled the trip to see Trump themselves, taking a more hardline stance, it seems, possibly in response to the humiliation Abdullah has endured, but also the fact tanks are currently parked on the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing, making it abundantly clear they will not be party to Trump's ethnic cleansing plans. Now, I said a moment ago that I thought Abdullah had turned up with a game plan, though, so let's come back to that point. Here's a short excerpt from France 24's coverage, which picked up on this point. Speaking at the White House, Abdullah added that Egypt would present a proposal on how countries in the region could work with Trump on the plan, despite Arab nations and the Palestinians having rejected it outright. I think one of the things that we can do right away is take 2,000 children, cancer children, who were in a very ill state. That is possible, Abdullah said as Trump welcomed him and Crown Prince Hussein in the Oval Office. Trump called it a beautiful gesture and said he didn't know about it before the Jordanian monarch's arrival at the White House. Now, people can read that one of two ways. Given how weak Abdullah has come across, a cynic, and I'm guilty of being one of these, might interpret this as a beginning to a more widespread, larger-scale acceptance of Palestinians into Jordan. And I'll bet Trump latched onto that too as something brilliant to build on for his plan. However, despite being cynical as a rule, I'm not choosing to buy that interpretation here. There are 35,000 Gazans waiting to leave the Strip to receive treatment right now. Only a few hundred actually having left to get it already because Israel are impeding it. By offering to take 2,000 kids who need such treatment, though, Abdullah mentions cancer patients, he's offering help. Now, this country has been criticised for not agreeing to take people in need of medical aid in here, the UK, to get it. Any country offering medical aid to 2,000 sick kids from a war zone, well, that would be called humanitarianism ordinarily, wouldn't it? And I think that is exactly how we need to read this, as an offer of humanitarianism, designed intentionally to catch Trump off guard, though. And that is why Abdullah brought it to the table. The Jordanian fear is that the aid the US supposedly gives Jordan, which Trump has cut off, despite his claims of still giving them billions, would be held over their heads and used as blackmail material. But by making an offer to take a small number of people for treatment, sick kids, makes the optics a lot more difficult for Trump politically to take a strong-arm approach here. Even if he might be reading that as the first proposal in a deal that's now in play and in the making, what it actually does is give Abdullah and Jordan necessary breathing space without having any consequences coming back on themselves for a moment, playing for time essentially until Egypt's proposal and all the other Arab leaders associated with that who are going to hear it becomes public. Whatever happens and whatever fallout Abdullah has to deal with here, though, neither Egypt or Jordan can afford to agree to Trump's plans. They simply cannot. What Trump wants, he's saying, are now parcels of land in Egypt and Jordan where these people can go. So he is basically at this point asking Egypt and Jordan to establish concentration camps for the people of Gaza, so he can launch a real estate venture on their land. For a regime like Jordan's, which has done so little, whilst genocide has been enacted mere miles away from them, they literally border Israel to the east, after all. To agree to Trump's plan would likely see such uproar in their country that Abdullah's reign would likely be brought to an end. And that would be the end of the Hashemite dynasty, a product of British colonialism as that is. A power grab shortly after World War I would fall with it. You also have to realize the largest population of Palestinians outside of Palestine live in Jordan. It's a big chunk of the populace there, some 2,000 refugees officially on the cards. But of course, a great many people who live there, Jordanians today, are descendants of people forced out of Palestine under the original Nakba. Egypt, equally, President Sisi, taking a much more hardline stance by not engaging with Trump at all, has already been warned of a coup and the destabilization of his country as well, should he go weak at the knees this time as well. Another leader with a track record of being too pro-Western in its approach to Israel. Both nations have something to prove that they will stand for what is right and against war crimes and genocide. But they have to prove it to not just the wider public around the world, but also to the people of their own countries. And where both have taken neutral or conciliatory stances up until this point with regards to Israel, with regards to Trumpianism, it's beginning to get very hard to see how they can keep that up and not suffer internal uprisings and dissent as a result of that. Egyptian and Jordanian populations are heartily sick of it. In light of all of this, if Trump thought he had a productive and successful meeting with Abdullah, which on the face of it, you can see why he might think that. On the quiet, I don't think it went quite as far his way at all. But do let me know your thoughts in the comments below on all of this. Did Abdullah roll over and show his
Mr. President, we are not being attacked by Trump administration because you did anything wrong. They are attacking us because of our stand on Israel. We want to make it very clear that we should not be confused with a generation of cowards who can be bullied by imperial forces and power-hungry individuals intoxicated by the wealth of apartheid. The United States of America has bullied nations before and imposed senseless and arbitrary sanctions and threatened wars. But we are a different generation. We are a generation of economic freedom fighters and will not be bullied, Mr. President. We agree with you, President, that we should not be bullied. We stand on the shoulders of the giants who confronted the establishment with their very lives, and we are willing to follow in their footsteps. We are not cowards, and they must not try us. And now, this year, you tell us that you will not be bullied We agree with you that we must not be bullied, but you fail to tell us what you are going to do about it. It is not enough to simply say you will not be bullied. You must tell us what action you will take. When you respond on Thursday, we expect you to provide real, detailed response to Donald Trump. We are taking our picket lines to the National Treasury and the Reserve Bank to demand nationalization and the transformation of the economy. We will picket outside correctional facilities to demand an end to overcrowding and syndicates within prison that control crime in the outside world. And we will demand the expulsion of private companies such as G4S, which has links to Israel and runs a prison in Mangaung. We continue to stand with the people of Palestine who remain under siege. We agree as the National Assembly that the Israeli embassy must be closed. Yet their flag continues to fly in our country, while Palestinians are threatened with mass deportation to foreign lands. We support the government's case in the International Court of Justice, and we must remain resolute in the face of sanctions and sponsored attacks. And importantly, we must oppose the colonization of Gaza by the USA. Justice and freedom for Palestine. One day, the people of Palestine will know the true meaning of freedom. Mr. President, we are not being attacked by Trump administration because you did anything wrong. They are attacking us because of our stand on Israel. They are attacking us because of the action the government has taken to ICJ. And we are saying to you, do not be misled by people who are saying you are under siege because of expropriation, which is meaningless act. That act does not say anything, and they all understand that language. They are using it to fight our case against Israel. And when you say they cannot bully us, you must start by removing the Israeli embassy to show them that will not be bullied. Thank you very much.
What is the specific role of the South African National Defence Force in the Congo, and in whose interest is our mission in the Congo? Whose peace and stability are we pursuing in the Congo? Is peace and stability for the continent, or peace and stability for mining interests of global capitalists? I'm a king. Our nation finds itself in the middle of a war in the Democratic Republic of Congo without a clear explanation as to why. As the EFF, we commend our courageous soldiers who fought bravely and placed their lives on the line in order that they must ensure there is peace and stability in the DRC. Our soldiers are disciplined and could never question those orders, and they have followed these orders with discipline. There can be no doubt that those soldiers who have passed on sacrificed their lives and deserve to be recognized and honored. However, at the heart of the conflict in the Congo is not a desire for peace, but the greed of the West for the minerals wealth of Congo. The DRC is a home of vast reserves of minerals essential for modern technology, including cobalt and tin, titanium and gold. Around 70% of the world cobalt, crucial for electric cars, batteries, and smartphones, comes from DRC. Yet Congolese people see none of these riches. Multinational corporations and West nations exploit these resources while fueling conflict to maintain their access. Over 200 companies from the UK and Belgium are involved in the purchasing minerals from the DRC, and these nations directly finance armed groups and perpetuate violence. These corporations and their governments remain complicit, failing to regulate supply chain or hold corporations accountable for using conflict minerals. The chaos in the DRC goes back to the colonial conquest and today is sustained by imperialist interest to loot the wealth of the DRC. This conflict is equally fueled by ethnic divisions in the region. It is here where the influence of Rwanda in the DRC emerges, as ethnic group that fled from Rwanda during the Rwandan genocide and settled in the Eastern Congo are used as the basis for Rwanda support for M23 rebel against the regime in the DRC, while Rwanda is simultaneously a proxy of Western interests in the Congo. The conflict in the DRC, therefore, does not require a head of state who suffers from a desire to be a hero at the expense of the lives of our soldiers without an appreciation of the condition that informs the conflict. It is when you do not appreciate the condition that inform the conflict in the DRC that you will speak in folk tongues when you speak to the president of Rwanda and communicate a different message to the people of South Africa. Lies have short legs, Mr. President, and we demand clarity from you because you have sent our soldiers to their death and then antagonized forces in their region, knowing very well you are not prepared for war. What is the specific role of the South African National Defense Force in the Congo, and in whose interest is our mission in the Congo? Whose peace and stability are we pursuing in the Congo? Is peace and stability for the continent, or peace and stability for mining interests of global capitalism? I take this opportunity to caution the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, not to fall into the pitfalls of warmongering and not allow desperation to inspire a misguided intervention in the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. When a nation is confronted by massive social and economic challenges such as poverty, starvation, homelessness, and unemployment, war has been a weapon of the ruling elite to mobilize patriotism. Those who have over the years in modern society lost of the popular mandate of the people have embarked on senseless wars, sacrificing soldiers in an attempt to unite the nation behind one common purpose and one common cause. The President of South Africa ought to be careful to not allow fanatics to incite him into war simply because it will give the people who have lost hope in him a common enemy to unite against. The dignity and pride of our army is not harmed because our African counterparts do not respect us. It is harmed because we have interfered in a conflict we do not understand and send our soldiers to fight rebels who are more equipped than us. We are being humiliated in DRC and threatened with war by President of Rwanda because our role of peace in the DRC is questionable, because there is no peace that has ever been achieved through the deployment of soldiers. The South African National Defense Force is not in DRC to pursue peace, but we are participating in the decade-old conflict to secure the mineral interest of the capital elite in the Congo. Our soldiers must withdraw from the DRC. They have not been given the necessary equipment to pursue the so-called peace they are there for. The motivation to send our forces to the DRC are dishonest. Our children, our sons and daughters of the South African National Defense Force have been sent to their death because the mineral interests of multinational corporations and individuals must be secured. Our soldiers have been sent to be glorified bodyguards of the mines in the DRC, and this mission has been disguised as a pursuit of peace and a defense of democracy. Bring our soldiers home, because our army should not be a pawn in a game of capitalists, which has now exposed the weakness of our military capacity. Bring them home, because every day they pass away, We see the consequences of a deliberate destruction of our arms manufacturer, Dinel, and we see the consequence of the year-on-year budget cuts to the Defense Department. Bring our soldiers home because they are the first line of defense for our people, not the first line of defense for the interest of capitalists and mining corporate. Mr. President, bring our soldiers home and desist from meddling in the affairs of DRC and Rwanda as if you are the USA of Africa, because we do not know if you'll be able to defend us when the rest of Africa turns their guns to the south. To rescue the lives of our soldiers from a war they are not prepared for is not an embarrassment. It is a strategic and necessary retreat that prioritizes life over profits. Cyril Ramaphosa, I appeal to you and your conscience. Bring our soldiers home. Even if you threaten to fight a war against Rwanda, we don't have the military capacity to can fight any other country. Our army has collapsed because you have taken money away from them and put it under your mattresses. Today, our soldiers do not have food, do not have ammunition, do not have sophisticated equipment. We are not scared to fight, but at the moment, we are not ready and capable to fight. The best thing is to retreat. I'm a king.
Of Africa, where dense rainforests stretch over vast mineral-rich lands, the Democratic Republic of Congo is once again on the edge of a major conflict. The resurgence of the M23 rebel group, a well-armed and strategically offensive force, has reignited tensions in a country already battered by decades of war, corruption, and humanitarian crisis. This rebellion is not just another chapter in the DRC's troubled history. It is a conflict that has set off a domino effect, drawing in multiple neighboring countries with diverse and sometimes competing agendas. Some claim to be acting in the interest of regional security, while others are accused of exploiting the chaos for economic gain. Old hostilities, unresolved disputes, and rivalries dating back to the Rwandan genocide of 1994 have resurfaced, turning this crisis into a complex geopolitical puzzle. But this is no ordinary rebellion. The M23 insurgency has reshaped alliances, challenged regional power structures, and exposed deep divisions among African nations. The response from the international community has been largely rhetorical, leaving the conflict to escalate unchecked. As a result, the situation is rapidly evolving from a localized rebellion into a broader regional standoff, with the potential to ignite a war that could destabilize Central and Eastern Africa. At the center of the storm are political power plays, economic exploitation, and deep-seated ethnic and territorial disputes. The question now is, who is really pulling the strings behind the conflict? Which regional players stand to gain or lose if the violence escalates? And what's at stake if this crisis spirals completely out of control? The M23, a Tutsi-led rebel group, has been at the center of violence in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo for over a decade. But its roots go even deeper, tied to the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide of 1994, the fragile peace agreements of the early 2000s, and decades of political instability in the region. M23 traces its origins to the National Congress for the Defense of the People, a Rwanda-backed rebel group that operated in eastern DRC in the 2000s. The CNDP, composed mainly of Tutsi fighters, accused the Congolese government of discrimination and failing to protect Congolese Tutsis from Hutu militias, some of whom were remnants of the perpetrators of the 1994 Rwandan genocide. In 2009, after intense fighting, a peace deal was brokered between the CNDP and the Congolese government. The agreement led to the integration of CNDP fighters into the armed forces of the Democratic Republic of Congo. But tensions soon surfaced. The Congolese government was accused of failing to uphold its promises to former CNDP fighters, including security assurances and political representation. By 2012, disgruntled Tutsi officers defected from the Congolese army and formed the March 23 movement, a name derived from the March 23, 2009 peace agreement they claimed the government had failed to implement. Led by Sultani Makenga, the group quickly launched a major rebellion, capturing large parts of North Kivu province and even seizing Goma, a strategic and economically vital city. The 2012-2013 M23 rebellion sent shockwaves through the region. It was not just another armed uprising. It was a direct challenge to the Congolese government and exposed deep-rooted tensions between DRC and Rwanda. A United Nations report accused Rwanda and Uganda of backing M23, supplying weapons, and even deploying troops. Kigali and Kampala denied involvement, but international pressure forced M23 into retreat. By late 2013, the rebels were defeated by Congolese and United Nations forces, and many fighters fled to Rwanda and Uganda. For nearly a decade, M23 remained dormant, but in late 2021, the group re-emerged, stronger and more aggressive than before. This time, they launched a fresh offensive, capturing key towns including Bunagana on the Ugandan border and Rutshuru in North Kivu. By 2022 and 2023, M23 had made stunning territorial gains, overrunning Congolese army positions and expanding their control across North Kivu province. In early 2024, they intensified attacks, seizing strategic roads and encircling Goma once again, a move that triggered fears of an all-out regional war. The human cost has been staggering. The United Nations estimates that more than 1 million people have been displaced by M23's offensives, worsening an already dire humanitarian crisis in eastern DRC. Few countries are as frequently accused of fueling the DRC's instability as Rwanda. President Paul Kagame's government has long been accused of backing the M23, supplying them with arms, intelligence, and logistical support. While Rwanda denies direct involvement, UN reports and multiple intelligence sources suggest otherwise. Rwanda's justification: national security.
M23 are not Rwanda.
Kagame claims that remnants of the Hutu militias responsible for the 1994 Rwandan genocide, now operating as the FDLR, Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, use Eastern Congo as a safe haven. According to Kigali, the M23 is merely a defensive force against these armed groups, and the real issue lies with Kinshasa's inability to secure its borders. But beneath this security narrative lies another powerful incentive: minerals. Rwanda has been accused of illegally extracting gold, coltan, and tin from the DRC, exporting them as its own. These minerals are essential to global technology industries, and their control means power and economic leverage. Moreover, Kagame and the DRC President Felix Tshisekedi have a toxic personal rivalry. Kagame is seen as a powerful strategic leader who has long exerted influence over Eastern Congo. Tshisekedi, on the other hand, is eager to break free from that influence, but his military struggles to match Rwanda's strength. Uganda's involvement in the DRC is a paradox. Officially, Ugandan troops are in Eastern Congo under a bilateral agreement with Kinshasa to fight the Allied Democratic Forces, a notorious Islamist group with ties to ISIS. But at the same time, Uganda has been accused of covertly supporting M23 by allowing them to use Ugandan territory as a staging ground. The answer lies in its rivalry with Rwanda. Historically, Uganda and Rwanda have vied for dominance in the region, and Uganda does not want to see Rwanda exert unchecked influence over Eastern Congo. By maintaining relationships with both Kinshasa and the M23, Uganda ensures that it remains a key player in the unfolding crisis, while also securing its own access to the region's wealth. Moreover, like Rwanda, Uganda has been accused of plundering Congo's resources, particularly gold. In the past, international courts have ordered Uganda to pay reparations to the DRC for looting during previous conflicts. For Uganda, this is a high-stakes game, one that could backfire if the conflict escalates. Burundi has sent thousands of troops into eastern Congo, officially to fight Burundian rebels operating there. However, its presence has become another source of tension. Burundi's government, led by President Evariste Ndayishimiye, sees Rwanda's actions as a potential threat to its own stability. Burundi's army has directly clashed with the M23, and there's a deep-seated fear in Bujumbura that if Rwanda's influence extends further south into South Kivu, it could destabilize Burundi itself. This fear is not without merit. Rwanda and Burundi have long been at odds, with both countries accusing each other of harboring dissidents and rebels seeking to overthrow their respective governments. If the M23 advances deeper into Congo, it could trigger a direct military confrontation between Burundi and Rwanda, adding another dangerous layer to an already explosive situation. South Africa, as part of the Southern African Development Community, force in DRC, has sent the largest contingent of foreign troops to support Kinshasa. However, its involvement has come at a heavy cost. Recently, 14 African soldiers were killed in eastern Congo, allegedly in clashes with Rwandan forces. This led to an unprecedented diplomatic fallout between Rwanda and South Africa, with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa branding Rwanda's military as a militia and threatening retaliation if his troops were attacked again.
We gather here as we mourn the death and tragic death and devastating loss of 14 South African soldiers who were part of a mission to bring peace to the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo.
For South Africa, this conflict is not just about the DRC. It is also about SADC's influence in the region. Rwanda and its Eastern African Community allies have pushed for direct negotiations between Kinshasa and M23, whereas SADC sees M23 as an illegitimate rebel group that must be crushed militarily. This divide has created a geopolitical tug-of-war, with SADC and EAC backing opposing strategies for peace. The last time the DRC plunged into full-scale war in the late 1990s, 9 countries were drawn into the conflict, leading to over 5 million deaths. Could history be repeating itself? With multiple nations already involved and tensions rising, the risk of direct military clashes between national armies is growing. If Rwanda and Burundi engage in open conflict, if South Africa retaliates against Rwanda's alleged attacks, or if Uganda is forced to choose sides, the crisis could rapidly spiral into a regional war. Meanwhile, the international community remains hesitant. Western nations have condemned Rwanda's alleged support for M23, but have done little to stop it. Economic sanctions against Rwanda, such as cutting off its access to international markets for minerals, have been suggested but not enforced. The African Union has called for peace, but without a unified stance from both SADC and the EAC, negotiations remain at a standstill. Your perspective matters. What do you think is pulling the strings in the Congo crisis? Share your thoughts and insights.
And from North Africa, let's move towards central part of the continent, where fighting has once again erupted in the eastern part of the DRC. This after nearly 3 days of a lull. Now, the Rwandan-backed M23 rebels have attacked the DRC army's positions in the South Kivu province. This is just days after leaders from East and Southern African blocs called on their army chiefs to propose a plan for implementing an immediate and unconditional ceasefire by Thursday between the M23 rebels and Kinshasa. Now, clashes and heavy shelling took place near the village of Ihusi, which is about 70 kilometers from South Kivu's provincial capital of Bukavu. It's also about 40 kilometers from the province's strategic military airport in Kavumu, which is the Congolese army uses to transport reinforcements and equipment to the region. The rebels have also threatened to advance toward the provincial capital of Bukavu. Earlier, they had paused their march towards South Kivu's capital after declaring a unilateral ceasefire. But in a post on social media platform X on Tuesday, a spokesperson for the Congo River Alliance, that also includes the M23, threatened that if crimes against their compatriots persist in the city, they would take full responsibility to eradicate the threat and protect their people. Meanwhile, despite calls by the joint summit in Tanzania to hold direct talks with the M23, President Tshisekedi's ruling party, the Union for Democracy and Social Progress, or the UDPS, has said that Kinshasa would not engage directly with the M23 rebels, whose latest offensive has killed thousands and driven hundreds out of their homes. Now, the M23, which is made up of mostly ethnic Tutsis, has in recent months swiftly seized swathes of territory in the mineral-rich eastern DRC after taking up arms once again in late 2021. They began advancing in the South Kivu province after taking control of Goma, the capital of neighboring North Kivu province, at the end of last month. The armed group, which has vowed to oust President Felix Tshisekedi, has since also captured Nyabibwe, which is a mining town in South Kivu, and is just short of entering the provincial capital of Bukavu. Now, control over Bukavu would give full control of Lake Kivu to the M23 rebels and Rwandan troops. The city has been preparing for an M23 offensive for several days. Schools, shops, and banks have been shuttered, and residents have begun fleeing the city, fearing an imminent attack. However, the Burundian soldiers, who are reportedly 10,000 in number and are in the eastern DRC to support Kinshasa, have allegedly tried to stop the M23's advances toward Bukavu. Moreover, these latest clashes come at a time when almost 300 Congolese soldiers are being put on trial in a military court in Bukavu for charges including rape, murder, and looting. The United Nations has reported that mass violations, including summary executions, gang rape, and sexual slavery, have taken place since the M23 advances began in the eastern DRC in January. The UN has also said that Rwanda-backed rebels have forcibly closed settlement camps, leading to the displacement of more than 110,000 people in recent days. Now, this has worsened the humanitarian crisis in the region, where cases of cholera are also increasing. So, as the deadline for the ceasefire given by the joint summit in Tanzania approaches, all eyes will be on whether Kinshasa agrees to sit with the M23 at the negotiating table and end the crisis, which is also likely to overshadow an African Union summit in Ethiopia this week, or let the offensive in the eastern part of the country continue.
My friends, after the debacle of the Syrian army, now same story in Central Africa. A handful of insurgents just clapped governmental forces. Here you can see the triumphal entry of M23 rebels into Goma, a city of 1 million inhabitants and the capital of North Kivu province, that they have just snatched from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Congolese army defending the city of Goma didn't just lose, it vanished.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
According to the latest news after capturing Goma, the M23 rebels are now pushing deep towards Bukavu, the capital of South Kivu province. The M23 rebels taught the DRC a masterclass in the art of war, and in the end forced thousands of governmental forces to either flee or surrender. So today we will break down how a small rebel force humiliated an entire nation. On the surface, it's just like any other African conflict. We have minerals, foreign mercenaries, and bystanding UN peacekeepers. The offensive by the M23 rebels have caused a humanitarian disaster, as hundreds of thousands of refugees, entire families have abandoned their homes.
This is Africa.
As always, there is a twist. The country of Rwanda isn't just supporting these M23 rebels. Professional Rwandan army soldiers are now fully embedded with the M23 units. Entire battalions of the Rwandan army have crossed the border of the DRC to storm the city of Goma. So this isn't just another rebel uprising in Africa. This is the official Rwandan invasion of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
The minerals, the money.
I don't know.
Truth be told, this ongoing war is already international, with the presence of thousands of soldiers from Burundi, South Africa, Tanzania, Malawi. Oh, and let's not forget about the infamous Romanian mercenaries. Don't worry, we'll break it all down. As a reminder, I highly recommend you to watch the first video I did on the topic, where I covered the entire context behind this war. If you're interested, the link is in the description below. I also had the opportunity to speak with people on the ground, so expect a pretty exclusive report. I gathered so much information that this video on Africa will be pretty long and girthy with content. As a matter of fact, I even got a DM from someone related to the M23 rebels. So the message said, Corneille Nangaa, current leader of the Alliance Fleuve Congo M23 movement, sends you a plane ticket plus takes care of your accommodation for a field report in the liberated zones.
Are you Chris?
Thank you. I appreciate the gesture, but I'm fine. Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Rwanda DRC war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. Before we start talking about all the military operations, you have to know who are the belligerents in this war. On one hand, we have the M23 rebels, composed of ethnic Tutsis that live in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Although they are a minority in the DRC, they represent a sizable population in Rwanda. These M23 rebels also nicknamed themselves the Lions of Sarambwe. On the other hand, we have the FARDC, the Armed Forces of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Although it has always been known that the M23 rebels have been backed by Rwanda due to ethno-linguistic ties, in recent years, there was more and more proof of direct military intervention of Rwandan troops on Congolese soil. Here, the ACLED declared the Rwandan Defense Force deployed around 3,000 to 4,000 troops into the DRC to support the approximately 3,000 M23 fighters operating in North Kivu, while some intelligence sources believe the figure is far higher, with possibly more than 7,000 Rwandan soldiers operating in Congo. Is it me, or when an army is called Defense Force, they always end up on someone else's territory? Honestly, we don't know the actual number of M23 fighters, but according to this data, we see that nearly 60% of M23 troops are in fact Rwandan army soldiers. That's how entire battalions of the highly disciplined and well-equipped Rwandan army served tours of duty in the DRC. Meanwhile, Kagame, the president of Rwanda, doesn't seem to know his troops are operating in the DRC.
Does Rwanda currently have any troops at all in Eastern DRC?
I don't know.
You're the commander-in-chief.
Yeah, there are many things I don't know.
Right. But I will say this. A lot of these issues stem from fake borders in the Middle East too. The Europeans caused this BS by drawing up fake borders in Africa. They're not real borders, and nobody really have to respect those borders. When their loved ones is on both sides of these so-called borders, they're going to help their loved ones. That's just going to happen. All right.
Over the years, the addition of this Rwandan contingent greatly increased the combat value of M23 fighters. As a matter of fact, M23 detachments are now even supported by Chinese Type 92 Yitian self-propelled short-range air defense systems. Same thing for the gear and equipment of the troops. Here on the left, you can see a Rwandan soldier with a Polish-made 762 MSBS Grot assault rifle. And on the right, an M23 fighter equipped with a Russian-made 762 AK-103 assault rifle mounted with a 40mm GP25 underbarrel grenade launcher. At this point in time, it's very hard to differentiate between a Rwandan army soldier and an M23 fighter. They have similar weapons, they both have the same helmets and bulletproof jackets. In comparison, I would say it's the governmental forces of the FARDC that actually look like a ragtag militia. The Congolese army, the FARDC, do benefit from a numerical advantage, but this is easily cancelled out by all the problems they have to face. Low salaries, bad equipment, corruption, and poor discipline. And that's exactly why the DRC hired foreign mercenaries, namely a Romanian contingent. For the most part, these men...
Some of the craziest shit in the world. You want to bring in the Europeans and pay them top dollar, but you don't want to pay your own soldiers? That's dumb, and that leader deserved to be overthrown.
Our former French Foreign Legion personnel, hired as instructors and weapons specialists to instruct Congolese army units. On the surface, they're just instructors, but in reality, I would say they're instructors with benefits. Because when push comes to shove, they don't hesitate to jump into battle. The reality is that the units of the FARDC are really in shambles. Sadly, it's nothing new. Here from 2012, the FARDC, a dilapidated army. The article mentioned corruption, underpaid soldiers, lack of basic equipment and training. Again in 2021, several officers of the DRC armed forces have been arrested for embezzling funds intended for soldiers. Actually, here's a story. There were these Romanian instructors. The Congolese battalion they had to train lined up in front of them. And they were shocked to see that many of these Congolese soldiers didn't even have boots. They were barefoot. And of course, none of them had body armor, even helmets. And of course, they didn't have battle belts either. They simply put the mags in their pockets. So the instructors started taking care of these guys and wanted to start with some physical training. That's when the Congolese soldiers admitted they had not eaten in 2 days. Allegedly, they had not been supplied in a long time, and their commander sold the remaining rations for his own personal profit. In the end, although forbidden, many soldiers take their AKs and end up setting up random checkpoints to ransom civilians, just so that they can eat. And that's in the best case scenario, because others just ransack and pillage entire villages. As you can see, sometimes there's a very thin line between governmental forces and the rebels.
This is Africa.
It's also important to mention that the FARDC often resorts to local levies called the Wazalendo to beef up the strength of army detachments. However, it also happens that these Wazalendo groups go berserk and fighting erupts between them and the army. So in my last video, we analyzed the territorial expansion of the M23 movement between 2022 and 2024. On the map, you can see in red, it's the territory controlled by the M23 rebels. We left off in March 2024, but then during the summer, the M23 launched a major offensive in the north towards Lake Edward, all the way to the town of Kirumba. That's also when we saw the start of peace talks between the DRC and Rwanda. Since the beginning of this military campaign, the political objective of the M23 movement was always Goma, the capital and main urban area of North Kivu province, home to over 1 million inhabitants. And it's probably higher by now due to all the refugees fleeing all the fighting. As you can see here, by June 2024, the western outskirts of Goma were now covered in tents and shanty towns. The M23 could have attacked directly towards Goma along the N2 road, but they were stopped by multiple strongholds and fortified bastions. The open and flat terrain made an attack in this direction very complicated, especially since detachments of Romanian mercenaries surveilled the entire sector with drones. And if they spotted an enemy concentration of forces, they would pound them with very precise mortar fire and 50 cal machine guns. That's how the command staff of the M23 maneuvered their forces and expanded their area of control outside Goma, which was made possible since their capture of the town of Rutshuru. Throughout the summer of 2024, the M23 rebels were regrouping forces for an offensive northwards towards Lake Edward. Despite a ceasefire agreement in August 2024, forward elements of the M23 cleared the town of Ishasha, located on the Ugandan border, and forced 100 Congolese police officers to flee across the border. So the commanders of the M23 maneuvered their troops and launched this massive bypassing operation through very inhospitable lands. The Western Front consisted of countless forested hills, and they're very steep. But since the M23 is an infantry-heavy army, they could easily infiltrate enemy lines from one ridge to another. That's how the M23 made considerable gains in the Mwezo district, as well as in the region of Masisi along the R529 road. During this push, the M23 took hold of the strategic mining town of Rubaya in May 2024. In these mines, we can find rare minerals such as coltan and tin, which are critical for electronics. According to the UN, between April and December 2024, the M23 rebel group has made $800 million in revenue related to coltan mining alone. Now, this was a game changer. With more money, the M23 can start flirting with enemy commanders whose allegiance is only a matter of dollars. And this is especially dangerous considering that the DRC has trouble paying all its soldiers. You will notice that on each axis of progression of M23 forces lies some mine exploitation sites. The same way as during medieval times, where knights went from besieging one castle to another, in the modern age, the rebels move from one mine to another. These minerals travel along this logistics line all the way towards Rwanda, via Mushaki, Kichanga, Tongo, and from there there's only one path across the jungle until they reach Katale, before reaching the border with Rwanda. So yeah, the economic miracle of Rwanda can mostly be explained due to all the minerals they got from the Congo.
He's obsessed with controlling the Kivu, the Eastern DRC, for reasons we all know, the minerals, the money.
I love gold.
I don't know.
From a logistics perspective, by capturing the town of Sake and Goma, the road to transport the minerals to Rwanda would be much faster. A direct 50 kilometers on paved roads instead of 125 kilometers across small jungle paths. As you can see, it was imperative to capture the town of Sake. That's how M23 detachments build so many forts on all the hilltops overlooking the city of Sake, which was effectively under siege. This also meant that Goma was de facto cut off from the rest of the DRC. It could only be resupplied by air or sea. You can clearly spot all these forts on satellite imagery. I mapped 14 of them right in front of Sake alone. There's this fort I call the BBL, because it's flat and all of a sudden there's a big bump. Honestly, this BBL is really well done. This trench bastion is so intricate. Deep trenches, multiple firing positions, backup positions, and this is only what is visible from above. There are another two forts on parallel ridges. There are also concealed communication trenches that link up with this other bastion I nicknamed the Eagle's Nest. This one has an outer ring, a second one in the middle, and the last one at the center. The M23 effectively built a multi-layered defensive system, all linked up by concealed communication trenches. And all these bastions can also mutually support each other. Together, this one forms like a trident with the Eagle's Nest at the center and three other forts at the tip. These trench bastions are so well built that artillery barely does anything to them. That's right, one shovel to rule them all. Only small detachments actually defend these forward outposts. So anyway, artillery strikes would do little damage. Some more troops are positioned in the Eagle's Nest, but the majority of the fighters are lodged in some village at the rear. And you guessed it, the FARDC cannot shell these villages for humanitarian reasons, because of all the civilians that live there. If there's an attack, they all run back to the forts using these concealed trenches. Honestly, just looking at all these fortifications located on the steepest hills, an FARDC counteroffensive in this direction would be extremely complicated, if not impossible. And from a tactical level, the moment Congolese soldiers would get fired at from different angles, they would just all run back. Meanwhile, FARDC outposts are easy to spot, because most of them only consist of one trench going around the camp. That's it. You can see the tents where the soldiers live. They're not even protected. Now the morale of FARDC soldiers is also very low, because from what I've heard, there's little to no rotation either. Congolese soldiers sometimes stay up to 6 months in these rudimentary forts, and good luck getting resupplied so close to the front. So many of the troops end up living in these forts with their entire families, women and children. As I stated earlier, there were peace talks between the DRC and Rwanda between July and September 2024. There was hope of a peaceful resolution. On the 12th of December, the ACLED declared, albeit fragile, peace agreements and ceasefires between the DRC and Rwanda will likely diminish overall levels of violence in the Great Lakes region in 2025. Haha, bliat, it will only get worse. 3 days later, on the 15th of December, the Angolan-mediated talks between the DRC and Rwanda broke down, since Rwandan President Paul Kagame didn't even attend the event. Within hours, fighting erupted once again across the entire region. The command staff of the M23 immediately resumed its offensive along Lake Edward and took control of Matembe on the 15th of December. It's really not a surprise. No fortifications were built by governmental forces apart from this random outpost. During this attack, M23 fighters surprised the FARDC troops by storming their positions with captured T-55 tanks. 1 day later, the M23 captured the town of Ali Bongo. In this footage, you can see M23 fighters celebrating their quick victory with a traditional dance. And that's when knowing French gets very handy. It's the lingua franca from both sides, to which they mix a lot of Lingala or Kinyarwanda.
Merci, nous sommes le 16 décembre 2024. Nous sommes précisément à Vichumbiro. Comme vous le savez, la coalition gouvernementale a attaqué nos forces et maintenant, ils ont pris la poudre d'escampette. Ils ont fui. Alors maintenant, le commandant en place qui est là, bonjour mon major, vous allez vous présenter.
In this footage, essentially, they talk about all the countless pieces of military equipment they have captured from the FARDC, including entire crates of 82mm mortar shells. FARDC detachments sent to stop the M23 kept melting away. Everywhere, Congolese civilians were shocked to see their governmental forces in full retreat, abandoning them to the rebels without a fight.
Cowards! Our men flee the battlefield!
5 days later, on the 21st of December, another detachment of about 30 soldiers took control of the village of Bingi. From there, they were only 50 kilometers away from the large city of Butembo, home to over 150,000 inhabitants. In this propaganda video, we see Lieutenant Colonel William Ngoma, the spokesman of the M23 movement, showing around the villages they have recently captured. A couple of days later, on the 28th of December, William Ngoma went back to the front and recorded all the equipment they captured from yet another FARDC base. We can see trucks, multiple mortars, heavy machine guns, a pile of AKs, and countless crates of ammunition. That's where we can really ask ourselves about the combat value of FARDC units. In this case, they had everything available to defend the position. That's where we can think that maybe their commander was bribed. Additionally, in the video, the M23 show 33 Congolese army soldiers they have captured, on top of dozens of Wazalendo militiamen.
Aligné, main. Oh, wow, Aboudjou. Razalindo. Ok. En feu, c'est le groupe des FDLR. Ok, ça ce sont des FDLR. Mais toi, tu as quel âge? Il a 13 ans.
Still, due to their numerical advantage, eventually the arrival of FARDC reinforcements and Wazalendo militiamen in the north prevented the M23 from carrying on their offensive. All this seems to have been a diversion, because that's when the M23 shifted their axis of progression 100 kilometers to the south near Lake Kivu. January 2025. On the 4th of January, after days of heavy fighting, M23 forces took control of the village of Katale. As you can see on the map, it sits on a very strategic ridgeline. It was the last verrou or lock on the R529 road leading straight into the town of Masisi. In this video, you can see a rally point of an entire company worth of M23 soldiers. They seem very well organized. We see 4 trucks heading to the front, filled to the brim with about 12 riflemen each. The M23 Rebel Offensive, sponsored by Toyota. Disclaimer, for legal purposes, this is a joke. As you could see, perhaps these soldiers were actually professional Rwandan army military personnel. The M23 offensive was carefully planned because right after the fall of Katale, the town of Masisi was abandoned by Congolese army soldiers. The same day, M23 General Biamungu was spotted in the center of Masisi. The capture of Masisi was confirmed by Le Monde. Rwanda-backed M23 rebels seized key town in East DR Congo. And it was also confirmed by the spokesperson of the FRDC. After FRDC resistance collapsed in this region, it reported 100,000 civilians fled and hit the road. The general staff of the FRDC blamed their failures on what they claimed to be a never-ending flow of Rwandan soldiers crossing the border. New report confirms presence of nearly 4,000 Rwandan troops in DRC, with M23 units directly supervised by RDF Special Forces. That's 12% of the entire Rwandan defense force now deployed in the DRC. The success of the M23 offensive can be explained that most of the attacks are now launched by Rwandan soldiers. Meanwhile, M23 detachments are supported and supervised by Rwandan special forces. As a force multiplier, these guys are essential to keep the cohesion of this entire detachment, to lead the attack, but also to prevent a complete rout in defense. So I'll tell you a typical scenario. You will have a detachment of special forces from the Rwandan army that will approach an FRDC bastion. Then they will provoke it by opening fire from all directions, and then they will fall to the ground. In response, all the Congolese soldiers in the fort rush to their AKs, machine guns, and fire back. The entire ridgeline lights up, a real hail of fire, until they run out of ammo. And often it's not very long, considering most FRDC soldiers only have 1 or 2 mags in their pockets. And of course, they have zero fire control. And now here's the twist. When they run out of ammo, what do? They all abandon the fort and the M23 just walks in. Rwandan army soldiers will be rotated out, and it's going to be M23 fighters that will garrison all these captured positions. Then it's pretty much rinse and repeat. And once again, the nightmare of M23 fighters is falling in an ambush laid out by the Romanian mercenaries. They will not retreat, but respond with a combination of drones, very precise sniper fire, mortar strikes, and heavy machine gun suppression. In that case, it's a real turkey shoot, and the M23 will suffer heavy casualties, and it will take many months for them to rebuild a sizable force. With that being said, these Romanian operators are not the only professional soldiers to be feared. In one of these battles, the M23 reported that they faced Burundian forces and captured some of their weapons, including a rare 40mm Chinese Norinco LG4 revolver grenade launcher. That's right, Burundi is also involved in this war, because they're worried about the growing power of their northern neighbor, Rwanda. And naturally, they also fear a spillover of this entire conflict on their homeland. 15 battalions of Burundian soldiers are reportedly deployed in the DRC, and another one is preparing to reinforce this expeditionary force. So at the moment, we can estimate 7,500 Burundian soldiers deployed in the DRC. And that's huge. That's 30% of the entire armed forces of Burundi. At the same time, on the 6th of January, there was this video where Burundian soldiers complained about not having been paid for 7 months. Yeah, I'm sure their commander used all this money very wisely. Now it gets complicated. The Burundian army is not only fighting the M23 rebels, but also a Burundian insurgency group operating in the DRC called the Red Tabara. Overall, by the 2nd of January 2025, this post showed the pictures of 52 Burundian military personnel confirmed as KIA by funerals and burials. On the 23rd of January, news agency SOS Media Burundi stated, Burundian military losses in Congo, a secret difficult to keep. They mentioned 81 Burundian soldiers who were injured during the fighting with the M23 on Congolese territory, and another 19 KIA. As a matter of fact, the biggest secret is the number of losses of Rwandan army personnel. More on that at the end of the video. Back to the map of military operations. The FARDC did manage to launch a counteroffensive out of Minova, but instead of pushing along the coastal road, they bypassed it along this ridgeline. For example, here we see Congolese soldiers that regained a hill near Bwerimana. On the 7th of January, the FARDC launched a counterattack towards Masisi with special forces. and regain control of the village of Ngungu. The objective was to cut off the R529 road linking Masisi to Sake and kick the M23 out of the Rubaya mines. From an operational perspective, the Congolese army tried to push north along Lake Kivu to unblock the city of Sake. That was a great maneuver, and on paper, that was the best thing to do. But fast forward 10 days, and by the 19th of January, the entire FARDC counteroffensive just crumbled. I personally think it's the arrival of additional Rwandan army battalions that tipped the balance. Another factor could be that a lot of these positions that were captured by FARDC special forces were handed over to Wazalendo militiamen or regular units with low morale, and due to a lack of discipline and cohesion, they simply abandoned all these positions. Within a few days, the M23 forces regained the initiative and went back on the attack. They captured Luzirandaka and pushed 18 kilometers all the way to Shanje. This also marked their entry into South Kivu province. From there, they could flank all Congolese army positions along Lake Kivu. 2 days later, FARDC units collapsed as M23 fighters pushed on the N2 road along Lake Kivu and captured the town of Minova. Then they advanced another 6 kilometers all the way to Kalungu. This was a disaster for the DRC. This battle was really a turning point because it essentially sealed the fate of Sake and of Goma. Now, what was impressive is that the M23 forces not only managed to conquer territories, but to secure their holdings, they also had to learn how to quickly administer all these regions. The fall of Sake and Goma. If we zoom out, this is all the territory that the M23 controlled by the 21st of January 2025. Now, with their southern flank secured, M23 forces started tightening their siege of Sake. That's when the first assault detachments descended upon Kimoka. This also meant the battle for the Goma pocket was beginning. The order of battle of the FARDC was approximately the following: 1,000 in Sake, 1,500 in Mumbambiro, 500 near position between Sake and Goma, nicknamed the Crater, and 3,000 spread out around Goma. To that, you can add a reserve force of 10,000 soldiers sitting at the rear that could be supported by reinforcement of 2,000 from police units. In total, approximately 18,000 Congolese security forces against perhaps 2,000 to 3,000 M23 and Rwandan soldiers. But in reality, we can divide by 10 the actual combat value of the FARDC. In this pocket of Goma, there was also the remaining UN peacekeepers of the MONUSCO contingent. As you can see in this video, these UN troops are very professional and they're very well trained with many communication trenches and bunkers. The problem is that they're absolutely hated by the local population, more hated than the M23 rebels. As a matter of fact, whenever UN convoys go for a patrol, they kept getting rocks thrown at them as they never engage in actual fighting and have never done anything to prevent M23 rebels from gaining ground. In Goma, there were also the African allies of the DRC known as the SADC. Out of an authorized 5,000 military personnel, only 1,300 strong contingent made it to Goma, of which 750 South Africans, but also Tanzanian and Malawian soldiers. 5 companies of South Africans held the line right behind Sake in Bambiru, which they heavily fortified during the past year and a half. 2 other companies were positioned around the airport of Goma. This SADC force was equipped with numerous armored vehicles, like these ones belonging to the Tanzanian contingent. Between the 22nd and 23rd of January, heavy fighting erupted in Sake. In response, the FARDC carried out multiple airstrikes under the cheers of all the local population. Once again, there was hope. Most importantly, the well-fortified SADC and FARDC bases were meant as a forward operating base to prevent a breakthrough towards Goma. Soon enough, South African soldiers engaged the approaching M23 troops with intense machine gun fire, both from bunkers and armored vehicles. Even anti-aircraft weapons were utilized to repulse the main assault of M23 troops. Here we even see men of the South African National Defense Force firing RPGs at the enemy, while others pounded enemy assault detachments with mortars. This battle was clearly intense, as 14 South African, 2 Tanzanian, and 3 Malawian soldiers were reported as KIA. The sacrifice of South African troops allowed countless civilians to flee from the rebels. In this video, you can see Congolese soldiers defending their base, albeit in a very disorganized way. Had they been betrayed, sold out by their commanders? What we know is that everything collapsed on the 23rd of January, when some Congolese army units simply abandoned their fortified combat positions.
Again!
The M23 moved in, and that's how the South African companies got surrounded. And soon enough, they found themselves out of ammunition.
A few moments later.
With the enemy closing in, the South Africans negotiated a ceasefire with M23 commanders. Expecting the debacle of their allies, the Romanian mercenaries built a fortified outpost with many concealed firing positions and bunkers. The next line of defense stood 1,500 meters behind Bambiru, on a slightly elevated position overlooking flat open terrain. As you can see in this video, a frontal assault by the M23 would have turned into a turkey shoot. The same way Call of Duty veterans wipe out all the noobs on Christmas Day. I was shocked by the following footage. We see the remnants of FARDC units just sitting on the ridgeline. No organization whatsoever. Eventually, a tank came in reinforcement along the main road. Moments later, 2 tanks are recorded firing towards Sake in the distance, while hundreds of FARDC soldiers continue fleeing towards this ridgeline. In this other footage, we can see the point of view from behind the tanks. They're completely demoralized, and the fighting has not even really started. There's no trench digging, nothing. Actually, where are their NCOs and officers to motivate the troops into launching a counterattack? The military commander of the North Kivu province went to the front to motivate all the troops. Governor of Congo's North Kivu province dies of his wounds in fighting with rebels.
Their general has fallen!
Meanwhile, Goma was brewing with unprecedented military activity. South African convoys were driving left and right. The objective could have been to create an armed fist to counterattack, unblock the South Africans in Bambiru, and kick out the M23 from Sake. This wasn't necessarily a bad plan, considering that all M23 soldiers left their fortified bastions and were now exposed in open terrain. The civilian population of Goma even escorted their beloved Congoleskaya Armia all the way to the battlefield. That's when, on the 24th of January, M23 commanders and their Rwandan army allies closed the trap. As the ridgeline was being reinforced, M23 troops from Minova pushed up the peninsula and launched an amphibious operation on Lake Kivu using little boats and rafts. They only had 100 meters of water to cross, and that's how they achieved total surprise. They flanked the entire line of defense. They took control of these 2 hilltops with a direct line of fire on the ridgeline.
A devastating loss for the enemy!
From there must have been total chaos, as all the troops retreated to the next line of defense, right at the entry point of the western suburbs of Goma, between this crater and this other one called Lac Vert. Once again, the defenders benefited from some sort of advantage. The attackers would have to cross over 2,000 meters of flat, open terrain. Boom! Trap number 2! That's when entire battalions of Rwandan army soldiers marched across the jungle, all around Mount Nyiragongo, and fell on the right flank of this ultimate line of defense. From Rutoke, the M23 and Rwandan troops most likely stormed this hilltop and rained hell on these Congolese soldiers defending this military base. And that's how the M23 captured the last topographic feature that could have prevented them from entering Goma. That's probably when the MONUSCO contingent got ambushed, as this vehicle was geolocated right here on the map. Overall, it's a complete disaster on the western flank of Goma. Now, let's take a look at the northern sector. There, M23 forces pushed along the N2 road directly into the northern outskirts of Goma. On the map, we can see a fortified bastion on a hilltop near Kibati, with a secondary line of defense 300 meters behind. It was an ideal position since the defenders could overlook 8 kilometers of flat ground. But disaster struck once again. Entire Rwandan army units officially crossed the border with the DRC and flanked this new line of defense. Surprise was total. Reportedly, the Rwandan troops crossed somewhere in this sector near the border posts 12 and 13. The worst is that in July 2024, the senator of North Kivu went to visit that exact location, demanding it to be seriously reinforced by the army. From this moment on, it was a complete rout. Looking at all this evidence, I personally think up to 10,000 Rwandan army soldiers were involved in this operation. Otherwise, it's impossible to explain the collapse of the FARDC. The DRC's foreign minister said, "As I stand before you, an attack of unprecedented gravity is unfolding. More Rwandan troops have crossed the border post separating Goma and Rwanda, entering our territory in broad daylight in an open and deliberate violation of our national sovereignty. This is a frontal aggression, a declaration of war." As a result, tens of thousands of refugees fled towards the city center of Goma. Entire families abandoned their homes in fear of getting caught in the crossfire. Due to this chaos, many soldiers used this opportunity to loot and pillage. Remained the Helm's Deep of Goma, the international airport, which was reinforced and turned into a stronghold. It was defended by 2 companies of South African and Tanzanian soldiers, as well as some Romanian mercenaries. However, by the end of the 24th of January, the airport was almost cut off from the rest of the city. Actually, some governmental forces tried to launch a counterattack.
Il est venu jusque dans l'aéroport international de Goma. Ça brûle, ça brûle, ça brûle. Donc nous sommes déterminés aujourd'hui pour sauver notre pays. Nous allons libérer la République.
But without fire support or discipline, they quickly fell back. Most FARDC commanding officers abandoned their men and fled by boat towards Bukavu. In this one, local residents helped a group of Congolese soldiers that got cut off to disguise themselves as civilians by throwing them clothes. Effectively, the army of FARDC soldiers defending the capital of North Kivu simply vanished. We enter the final chapter of the Battle of Goma on the night of January 25th to the 26th. Columns of FARDC troops were withdrawing from their positions near the Rwandan border. We know this because in the video it says Kivu Ceramica, and this factory is located 1 kilometer away from the DRC-Rwanda border. Later on January 26, M23 commanders ordered all remaining FARDC soldiers to surrender to UN peacekeepers. Here, an entire group of men entered the Uruguayan compound with their hands in the air. By the 27th of January, the FARDC and Wazalendo militia still held some parts of the city. They even managed to counterattack and reclaim the National Broadcaster building. However, later that day, over 1,200 Congolese soldiers located at the airport surrendered, allowing the M23 to take control of it. In this footage, you can see the lines of Sarambwe at the gate of Goma's International Airport, a symbol of their victory on the DRC. By nightfall, Goma had fallen to the M23 and Rwandan forces, although dispersed firefights still erupted until January 30th. All across Goma, groups of FARDC held their weapons above their heads and surrendered to Rwandan border guards. Here, a platoon of Congolese soldiers fled across the border in Rwanda to surrender. In this one, an entire football stadium was filled with POWs, estimated between 2,500 and 4,000. In the end, thousands of these prisoners were now being transported to the rear. As part of the aftermath, M23 fighters and Rwandan soldiers started occupying the city as they were surrounded by massive crowds. Moments later, William Goma, the spokesman of the M23 movement, made his triumphal entry into the capital of North Kivu. M23 troops also got their hands on enormous quantities of military equipment and ammunition. Now, what happened to our Romanian mercenaries? While those that could fled on their own from the airport, about 50 to 100 men. The others probably negotiated their surrender with the Rwandan army in exchange of some dollars. That's how the M23 accepted the rendition of 288 Romanian mercenaries. And of course, the M23 made sure to turn the surrender into an entire spectacle.
Move, move, quickly, quickly. Jump, jump, quickly, quickly, quickly. Hey, what? Hey, quickly, 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 quickly.
The Romanians were then brought across the border in Rwanda, from where they were taken by bus towards the capital of Rwanda, Kigali. Apparently, during this event, they were very well treated. They got extra food, cigarettes, and overall spoke positively of Rwandan soldiers, stating that they were very professional and disciplined. In the end, the Romanian mercenaries were allowed to fly back from Kigali all the way to Romania. But of course, that's not the end of the DRC-Rwanda war. On the 29th of January, Bloomberg reported Angolan president calls on Rwandan troops to leave Congo. Felix Tshisekedi calls for mobilization, response underway. In the south, in Bukavu, the local population is preparing for battle from the advancing M23 troops. and any able-bodied man is drafted into the military. On the 3rd of February, the political wing of the M23 movement announced a humanitarian ceasefire. At the same time, entire convoys of Rwandan military personnel entered Goma. It's not a surprise, a lot of troops are needed to secure and administer all this territory, especially after numerous Wazalendo uprisings and ambushes on M23 troops. Another question that can be asked is how long can the Rwandan Defense Force sustain this battle of attrition? In Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, satellite imagery of one military cemetery indicated an additional 600 graves that have been dug since the restart of the M23 offensive, especially since President Kagame even told the army in his end-of-year address, "May your sacrifices always be recognized and rewarded." Very strange for a country supposedly not involved in this war.
I don't know.
And on top of that, we have to consider that many Rwandan army privates are buried where they fall in Congo. According to the latest news, despite an attempt to a ceasefire, M23 forces are now continuing their offensive towards Bukavu, the capital of South Kivu. Meanwhile, the FARDC are preparing for the counteroffensive. However, like we've seen, they suffer from many problems that cannot be resolved overnight. Recently, a scandal erupted blaming some Congolese army troops for pillaging entire villages near Bukavu. Currently, they're trying to increase the size of their army with a major recruitment campaign. While the FARDC rebuild their ranks, the DRC's allies have come to help. An additional 1,000 soldiers from Uganda were sent to Butembo on the northern front, while it was announced that a 16th Burundian battalion has also arrived in the Congo. It's unclear to know where this war will lead, but we're all aware that the resource curse is real, and the minerals in the DRC bring too much wealth for peaceful resolution to this conflict. Who knows, maybe the Democratic Republic of the Congo will resort to hiring thousands of Colombian mercenaries to restore their territorial integrity. They have renowned expertise in jungle war.
Go figure. Follow me.